and find the other two panelists.
Well, welcome everybody. This is the second day of the seminar on manufacturing pollution in the South. I'm happy to represent UNCTAD in hosting this event. This event will also include there's a third and a fourth session of the seminar. Today we have the first session starting now on manufacturing pollution, mitigating manufacturing pollution in the South, followed by a session on mitigating pollution in tanneries. We encourage participants to stay throughout the seminar if they are able to. The session is being recorded and will be made available online after the event. The seminar is part of the program Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution, supported by the UK FCDO. This event is also an official side event of the 2022 World Circular Economy Forum to take place in Rwanda later this year. The background papers will be reworked based on the seminar discussions, and discussions will also serve as inputs to procurement calls under the SMAP program, which will be launched in the second semester of this year, funding a total of 10 million USD worth of projects. Those projects, the scope of this call will include tanneries, textiles, and food processing. So many sectors related to the topics that will be discussed here today. Session 3, starting now, will run from 9 a.m. to 10:45 at Geneva time. So 1 hour and 45 minutes. And the participants are encouraged to use the Q&A function to ask questions to the panelists. Without further ado, I'll introduce Professor Harro from Blottnitz, who is a professor at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, and he'll be moderating the panel 3. Thank you, Professor.
Well, good morning, Enrique, and good morning, participants in this workshop. I'm a professor in chemical engineering, actually not Stellenbosch, but just across the First River, as we call it here, on the Cape Town side. So at the University of Cape Town, and we love our colleagues in Stellenbosch. My dad studied there, and one of our panelists is an honorary professor there, I believe. So I'm a little bit new to all of this, and we're, I think, a fairly intimate grouping this morning at 16. So this is going to be a conversation to get to know each other and our work. I believe we've got 5 panelists, and I'm not quite sure whether the title is Patterns of Manufacturing Pollution or Tackling Manufacturing Pollution in the Global South. But yeah, we need to know the patterns before we can tackle the beast. So we'll, I believe that our 5 panelists all have a little preparation or have prepared what they want to share with us on this topic, and they are, and I only know one of them before, so it's, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves a little bit to me and to the audience in terms of what your relation is to the work we're discussing. That they are Ms. Keru Munene and Ms. Ying Zhang, and I've seen you both on the call. I'm not sure whether we've got Ms. Jaee Nikam from Bangkok on the call already, and Mr. Arpit Bhutani from Snow Peak in India, and then Desda Mebratu, whom I've had the pleasure of working with on related topic in the past, from Ethiopia, and honorary professor with my colleagues in Stellenbosch. Hello, Desda. So that said, I think let's just go and ask the panelists to introduce themselves. You can do that better than I. Keru, do you want to say hello and what your relation is to the topic we're discussing today? Just a very first sort of just a minute, and then I'll go a second round and ask you to speak to the topic.
Sounds good. Yeah, good morning, everyone. So my name is Keru Munene. I'm a project leader at Open Capital, and I have over 6 years experience working with businesses, investors, and development partners in East and Western Africa and West Africa. And so my role with SMAP conducted in terms of study last year, in terms of how to identify private sector interventions or even solutions to mitigate pollution in Kenya and Uganda. So very excited to be here.
Fantastic. And can I ask you what sort of training allowed you to get into this line of work? Are you an environmental scientist, or are you an engineer of sorts, or?
So my background is in finance, but the reason why I'm very interested in this work is more of a personal story, seeing the impact of like this increase of manufacturing or industrial activity in Kenya, but we are seeing in terms of the environment and even people being affected. So I have seen where I grew up in the rural country, very nice biodiversity, but through time, with now more increase of industrial activity, that has more been lost. And so for me, that is more of a personal call, but also very interested in how the private sector can be involved because they're the ones producing, this more or less waste. So how can you provide these very interesting solutions to more or less mitigate industrial pollution? So that's it's more of a personal story, but also from my engagement through the private sector as well.
Fantastic, thanks very much. And everyone who's trained in something brings something to this. So there isn't the right background to come with. These are very difficult problems needing teams of people that complement each other. So let's hear from Ying Zhang. Just a brief introduction. Who are you? How are you related to this topic?
Thank you, Professor Blottnitz. Hello, everyone. My name is Ying Zhang, and I'm the Project Management Officer in the Economy Division of the United Nations Environment Program. I was trained as an international economist in college, and I studied environmental science and policy in my master's. So it's a kind of a combination of both trade and environment. And that led to my current work, which really focuses on environment and trade. How can we use trade policy as a positive force to drive environmental sustainability and also improve policy coherence between different policy domains, trade, environment, industry, and climate. So I very much look forward to the discussion today. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And I guess in your role at the United Nations, you interact with officials from a range of countries in the global South who have to deal with this problem. Yeah, fantastic. Just checking then whether our other two panelists have joined the call thus far before I move on to Desda, who's last on my list. Just a quick check, has Ms. Jaee Nikam joined the call?
Not yet, Professor.
Not yet.
I got a message, is having a bit of a problem, but will be joining us soon.
Right. And then Mr. Arpit Bhutani?
I haven't heard from him.
We are chasing him, so he will join us very soon.
Great. So then let's go over and hear from Desda. Desda, you've worked in and around these problems for a long time. Where are we? Well, maybe just introduce yourself for those on the audience who don't know you. Many years with UNEP. But yeah, where are you based now, and how are you related to the problem we're discussing today?
Thank you very much. Great to see you, Harro, and good morning to all, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Desda Mabratu. I'm currently in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. My background is chemical engineering and specialized in environmental process engineering and industrial environmental economics, and worked for more than 32 years in industry and environment issue, including being head of the business industry unit of UNEP and deputy director for Africa. Retired, early retirement 5.5 years back, went back to academics. I'm currently with Addis Ababa University and Stellenbosch University. And I was coordinating the SMEP program, the detailed scoping done in Kenya Ethiopia and Tanzania. So I'm very happy to be part of this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we've got a good understanding of the three panelists that are already here. And I believe you've prepared a little input on the topic. So shall we go in the same order? Keru, do you want to go first and speak to what you've prepared on this topic?
Sure. So for me, my role is sharing what are key findings from our work, through the SMAP program, so in Kenya and Uganda. So, so thank you for projecting the slides. So maybe on the second slide, I think it's just to show how important manufacturing is to the two countries, but it's not just limited to the two countries. It's also within sub-Saharan Africa and also at large in Africa. So specifically from our work, which we focused on Kenya and Uganda. So manufacturing is the fourth largest contributor to the Kenya's economy. And here we are seeing being dominated by small, medium-sized enterprises, but also jobs being created. And over time, we are seeing like that growth. There's the drivers of manufacturing will be contributed. There's increasing household consumption, higher disposable income, but also from a government standpoint on how do we create more jobs, from doing value addition. So as you are aware, in most of these sub-Saharan African countries, including Kenya, agriculture is still, the biggest contributor to the economy. And so there is a shift towards now agriculture, towards manufacturing, so that now how do you create more value addition in the process? And so the government has more invested, so creating more of an environment, favorable environment, so having those special economic zones, thinking about the transport infrastructure, and even development of the industrial parks. Yes, we still have a long way to go, but through implementation of such policies, we see that manufacturing is going to grow. Some of these, the key sectors includes food and beverage, from even agriculture being the, having those provision of inputs towards the food and beverage sector. We have the basic and fabricated metals and also the chemical and chemical products. So maybe on the next slide, and this is just to compare Kenya and Uganda, you will see is the same story, where you will see there's the manufacturing still continue to drive. And that is being seen even in the sub-Saharan, Africa, in terms of the countries, being that manufacturing is contributing about 37% of the GDP, but we see that this is going to also cause environmental degradation. So we are seeing increase in terms of the pollutants, the toxic metals, dyes, the agents, air pollutants, even organic waste being more or less produced, especially from the food and beverage sector. And this is through air, water, and soil. Maybe on the next slide, which is, in terms of the next slide, is how, as manufacturing continues to grow, there is an increase in pollution levels. And we are seeing that at the moment. So like if you compare 10 years ago, right now, you see more discharge in terms of the wastewater into the rivers. So like Nairobi River is highly polluted. We are seeing even concerns, into like Lake Victoria, where there's increase in even the hyacinth. So as we see more industrial activity, then there's also increase in pollution. But this shouldn't more or less happen. It shouldn't be the norm. We can change that. And by now thinking about what are those solutions that we can put in place to mitigate this pollution. And so just going to the next slide, and it's thinking about what are those barriers that have hindered the uptake of pollution mitigation solutions. And the way we classify this is in three ways. So one, there's the financial barriers. So when we talk to various private sector like the manufacturers, the various solution providers that are thinking about these circular economy solutions, there is high capital expenditure requirements. So like they would need to import equipment. So like we talked to company that is doing plastic pyrolysis. So they extract, in terms of fuel or even oil, more from the tires and sell that. But finding that equipment locally was difficult. So they had to import. And consider even the devaluation of the currency, that also is more costly even to these, solution providers. So there's that one aspect. Then the second is the operational cost and even access to these technologies for ongoing maintenance is also difficult, but also the lack of access to affordable local financing and supplier terms. That is also becoming a challenge. So the traditional banks, they still, yes, there has been a movement and increase of green economy, funding these solutions, but it's still nascent. And so we would need different types of financing solutions so that to encourage investment into in these solutions. The second is the technology barriers. And so there is limited market research and market studies. So on the various solutions. So we looked at like biogas. There's still, yes, there's a few studies, but doesn't show what is the business case to the various manufacturers, to the various solution providers, so that it can encourage even adoption. Then minimum local presence of experts and distributors to advise the technology uptake for both countries. And this is even seen even across sub-Saharan Africa. And then limited local talent working with these technologies. The third barrier is more the regulatory, the regulatory aspect. So there has been now policies, like you saw, like the ban of single-use plastic in Kenya, but also implementation of the solid waste management bill. But the enforcement is also a challenge. So are there alternative options? So like even when the plastic was banned, people had to find, even as a consumer, you had to find what are those alternative options. So the one thing is, yes, there is in terms of enforcement has been a challenge. In terms of aligned regulatory standards, that also has been a challenge as well. And so there is need even having that framework, more or less a global framework to guide countries in terms of adopting some of these solutions, and then they are now localized to the specific countries. And then the specific is the lack of awareness of these existing standards and requirements. So those are the barriers we identified in terms of the financial technology and regulatory barriers. But what's now the question for us is, what are the solutions to come? What interventions can we make to overcome these barriers? And so on the next slide, we focus on now addressing some of these interventions. So we looked at one, which is tied to the regulatory, to the various barriers. So for instance, the financial, so we are looking at the financial assistance. So looking, yes, specifically the solution providers, the manufacturers, how do you provide catalytic financing? And so it's thinking broadly about providing patient capital to de-risk some of these investments, to pilot these new technologies between the manufacturers and the various solution providers. So there is a role of even development partners being involved to provide that patient capital or even more impact investors. And this is looking at different even financing structures. So looking at the blended type financing, you're looking at having like results-based financing. So, but it needs to be more or less of a longer term. And that's what we are seeing, borrowing from like the energy sector, where there has been increase of like off-grid uptake. So what can we do in the same case for the pollution mitigation technologies? Then the second is the technical assistance. And here we are looking at the various solution providers, the various manufacturers, the investors. And here is looking, addressing how do we create more awareness. So conducting that market assessment to estimate the size, but also to inform what is the business case to these manufacturers? Does it make sense for them to adopt some of these solutions? And if there's no information out there, then it's difficult to convince like manufacturers to take up some of these solutions. Then also there's investment readiness support. And here is looking at the solution providers. So people who are now specifically designing business models to, address some of these challenges. So we have seen, yes, an increase of companies that are thinking about some of these solutions. So for instance, like the black soldier fly, to more or less use the organic waste from the food and beverage sector. We are seeing also like other companies thinking about waste to energy solutions. But how do you provide that support so that they're able to articulate that their value proposition to the various investors and able to receive that funding? Then the other aspect is the market linkages, and here is looking between the manufacturers and solution providers. So how do you bring them together? And this is building even the work on the market assessment that has been done. We have created that awareness and now providing those market linkages. And it's through either through pilots that could be done to ensure that there is improved linkages. And then finally is more the technical expertise to enhance the development and tailoring of these new products. So there needs to be continued research and development. So investment in R&D is very critical, but also sharing of expertise. I know like from the development, more from the developed countries, there's more expertise. So how do you share that? And we have seen successful stories, even from other sectors. So for instance, like in agriculture, where we have seen manufacturing companies providing that expertise. So like the likes of, we have seen TechnoServe or Partners in Food Solutions, coming together and providing that level of expertise. And then there's other enablers. So this is looking at the regulation component. And here, one of the things that has been difficult, unless pollution, right now it's very difficult to understand what is the impact. You can experience until now these incidences of pollution has been reported. There is no way of getting that data to understand what is the level of impact. So there are some incidences where they have not, or companies have not been checked because incidences have not been reported. So what we have seen in the media, and also like understanding what is the level of impact, is where now there has been reporting of the felt effects by the various stakeholders. So for instance, like near like the ones discharging into the Nairobi River, until people announce that to now the regulatory body, that is NEMA, there's no way to now enforce some of these regulations. So there's support, there needs to be support in the data collection and monitoring, just to improve the impact measurement and to say, are we making progress, to reduce the impact of pollution? Do these technologies make sense for us? Is it achieving the goal that we are they're intended to achieve? Then also participation in advocacy efforts to create more favorable policies. And here is having that continuous partnership between private sector, between the government and even the civil society, the development partners, coming together and creating more or less favorable policies. So we have seen like extended, producer responsibility agreements, which have been really helpful to ensure like in more like plastic space. But how can we do that? Not just plastics, but also in the whole waste continuum, so that we more ensure that we are creating a sustainable environment, because we have one planet. Business cannot operate on a dead planet. So thank you very much. So that is my more or less message in terms of partnerships. I think it's important, but also how do we address those barriers?
Thank you very much, Keru, for locating your work and your analysis there. And yes, I would agree. And especially if you're in the food and beverage industry, you're not going to have anything to process if you're living on a dead planet, unless all that food that you're going to process is grown in a laboratory. but it should be coming from a diverse, biodiverse and rich ecosphere. I'm going to go through the other panelists to introduce their work and their analysis. I'm going to encourage participants to post their thoughts and reactions and questions in the chat. And then once we've heard from the panelists, we'll try to see where the commonalities and questions, and we'll take what's been posted in the chat as a cue for discussion, if that is okay. And unless anybody has an immediate point of clarification to Keru, but that you could also, I think, do in the chat, if there was anything unclear. But let's move on then to Ying Zhang to introduce her analysis and to get us going into your part of the panel today.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Keru, for a very comprehensive and informative presentation, many of which I think I fully agree, and I share similar observations as well from my work and the work in UNEP. Before I share some more observations or comments on this paper and the project, I want to start with some of the recent momentum at global level. I think it is a very timely and important research and analysis in a sense that if you look at the recent progress made at the global and regional level in terms of tackling the pollution challenge, just a few weeks ago at the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, countries adopted the resolution to end plastic pollution and work towards a kind of legally binding agreement. This is really a big breakthrough, I think, and very encouraging. And actually, apart from plastics, which is really under the spotlight at the moment and over the past years, there were also a number of other resolutions that are closely related to pollution and manufacturing. If you look at the next slide, thank you. I put here some of the resolutions. You can see some of them are related to circular economy, which I think has been identified as a pathway for reducing manufacturing footprints in this paper and projects, and also the sound management of chemicals and waste, and also the management and governance of minerals and metals, which were used quite a lot in manufacturing processes. I think this demonstrated a kind of a consensus and really growing momentum from countries and their commitments to tackling pollution as one of the important challenges for environment and for the planet. This year also marks the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Conference for Human Environment. And there were a lot of discussions and preparations for Stockholm Plus 50. I was listening to the preparatory meeting a few days ago this week in New York. And I really heard in so many member states, their representatives in their statements highlighted the challenge of pollution and also the importance of transforming some of the high impact sectors and value chains, the sectors that have high environmental footprints. For example, manufacturing. I think that has been shared in by a number of representatives, and also the importance to find circular models to improve resource efficiency and to transform the way we produce and consume and trade in order to reduce this footprint. And it's not just in the environment community. I think if you hear or watch some of the recent conversations in the World Trade Organization, in the trade community, there are structured conversations on trade and environmental sustainability. There were conversations about trade in plastic waste, and many of which were very actively participated or even led by a number of developing countries in Asia and in Africa. I think that's really a positive thing to observe, and it shows that and this really goes beyond the environment and the community, climate community, where in the past some people say it's a kind of a bubble, but now it really goes beyond that and to reach the business, the private sector, the trade and industry community as well, which is very much needed, I think, to be part of the solution. With that, I think let me start with some of the comments to this paper. The first thing I would like to share, I think is also a question, because for me, I think it has a lot of interesting data and information. I was particularly interested in the findings from the project countries. So Tanzania, Kenya, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. I think those country level insights are extremely interesting and useful, I think, in a sense that it can offer some of the useful thinkings and solutions to other countries as well. So I think the paper mentioned that some of the key sectors as textiles, as battery production, and also food and beverage production. So my question is whether I think it would be possible to understand a little bit more where this pollution comes from in the manufacturing sector. I'll give you an example. I think in UNEP, we recently have been kind of transitioned to a value chain approach where we can identify environmental hotspots depending on which segment of the value chain the country specializes in. For example, if you look at next slide, please. Thank you. Here is an example from a recent study UNEP has done for textile value chain. It's a kind of a global level average assessment, but it mapped out some of the environmental hotspots alongside the value chain. So we can have a better understanding, for example, whether it comes from fiber production or fabric and yarn or textile or apparel production. And it's different, I think, from country to country, and also depending on environmental footprint. For example, this chart shows the one for climate impact. We can also do it for biodiversity, for land use, for water use, water scarcity, and ecosystem. So I think if we could have a kind of a country level understanding of this kind of zoom in picture, it could help us better understand where are the environmental hotspots in those countries in this project. And also, I think it could help us to prioritize a little bit, but also to understand where is the place that we should focus more and spend most of the effort and finance to tackle that challenge. The next point I would like to mention is the paper, I think, highlighted the importance of the cost of pollution, and especially the lack of knowledge and data, which I fully agree. I think it's such a critical point. And such kind of cost quantification or assessment should include not just, I think, the impact on land or on water, but also on ecosystem, on climate, and on human health as well. I mean, I know it's difficult to find the kind of perfect quantification methodology or perfect modeling methodology, but with the improvement of the tools of the methodologies, I think we can now here today have a much better understanding, and it makes it easier as well to have a better overview of such of a cost analysis and assessment. And such kind of cost analysis could also help to inform policy, I think, especially trade and industrial policy. Because if you look at many of the countries where we worked with in the past and few years, I think when we talk about industrial and manufacturing strategy, it's very much concentrated on how many economic benefits it's going to create, how many jobs it's going to create, which is very important. But at the same time, it's also missed out the impact on the environment or on social, on the society, on employment, on equality. So I think it's important that we have such kind of a comprehensive assessment of trade and industrial policy. So we understand when we are setting up a new export processing zone in this region, in this country, what kind of risk and hazards is going to lead to in terms of biodiversity loss, in terms of pollution to the air, to the land, and to the water resources. This could also, I think, help to improve the whole coherence between environment and trade policy, because on one hand, from the environment community where we work with, we heard a lot of commitments and strong interest for countries to come up with new climate actions under their NDCs, nationally determined contributions, the mitigation measures, net zero commitments, and also their commitments to global environmental conventions in terms of pollution control, use of, and governance of chemical use. At the same time, in the trade community, there are a lot of trade policy, trade agreements being put on the table or negotiated. And to what extent these two kind of policy schemes are supporting each other instead of conflicting with each other or contradicting with each other, to what extent that they can reinforce their commitments in a way that is coherent and holistic. And also a recent example, I think, is a COVID-19 recovery measures. We know that many countries, I believe, I didn't check, but I believe many of the project countries have also launched economic stimulus packages, and manufacturing, if, as Keru mentioned, is a big part of the whole economy, would be included in terms of rebuilding and recovery. But from the UNEP data and research, we saw very small portion of those existing stimulus packages are good for environment, unfortunately. So in that sense, I think we need more discussion with that bringing different communities, policy domains together, trade, industry, environment, and climate. My last point is about technology, I think, which was very well articulated by Keru as well, and I fully agree. I mean, from our experience, I think, of course, we know environmentally sound technologies can be a very powerful and useful solution to addressing manufacturing pollution in developing countries. And in most of the cases, those technologies are well available. And the key is really the cost, you know, and the cost does only cover the equipment, the product itself. It also associated with the kind of engineers, the labor, the personnel, the labor force that have the capacity and skills to do the testing, to do the maintenance, to do the installation. So I think in that sense, technology is key, but how can we make it accessible and available and affordable as well? So I remember when I was talking to some of the practitioners in Africa a few years ago, we were doing a project to liberalize trade in environmentally sound technologies, which was which got a lot of attention in the trade community and was really popular at that time. And many of them told me, yes, I mean, tariffs is a big barrier, definitely. But even if it was cut to zero, for many of us SMEs, we can't afford it anyway. So that makes me think that, so, I mean, we have to think about more proactive actions to address this cost issue. And to me, as I think Keru mentioned this as well. I think it is really key is to build the local productive capacity. Of course, technology transfer is important, but I think there are a lot of advantages for doing it locally. When you have the country have the productive capacity to produce, to design, and to even innovate some of the solutions that could be tailored more and fit in better to the local circumstances. I've seen some of the examples in Africa, in Asia. Some of them are nature-based solutions. Some of them are based on traditional knowledge. Some of them are deeply rooted in the good understanding of the local demand and domestic circumstances. Some of them are not so complicated, but it's so smart that it could bring a business case well on the ground. So I think also, of course, in terms of the production process, it's sometimes not feasible for one country to have the capacity to produce the whole parts of the product. But if you have certain kind of regional value chain that allows country to connect to it and to specialize in certain part of it or a certain segment of the value chain, it brings multiple benefits. The technology could be more available and affordable for the local manufacturers. And if you are competitive, you can export to other neighboring countries. And I think some examples have already been experimented and experienced, I think, in ASEAN region, where many developing countries transform from net importers to net exporters of environmental technologies and benefit from it. And of course, this is not easy. As Keru mentioned, there's a whole couple of challenges there, and it requires a whole kind of ecosystem and enabling environment for local enterprises to thrive and to innovate. We need the right policies, the right regulations, and the subsidies or some kind of a support from government for the entrepreneurs. And also we need some kind of measures to drive domestic demand as a way to really scale up the production of such technologies. And we also need the financial sector well on board as well. And I think Keru talked already a lot about the finance gap. I just want to add one point, which is trade finance, because we know like 80 to 90% of trade relies on trade finance. And it covers both kind of different value chains and sectors. And we already see some of the companies and banks are collaborating with each other to set up targets and standards for companies and to promote the green technology using trade finance instruments, import-export banks, export credit agencies. I think that is very positive, and we need to explore all these opportunities and unlock the potential here. So with that, I think I'll stop my presentation, and I think I've already shared some of the resources with the authors, and yeah, happy to discuss and answer any questions. Thanks.
Unmute. Thank you so much, Ying, for that analysis and the reading of the draft paper. Again, if there are questions to Ying, please do put them in the chat. We'll run through our panelists to give them all a chance to speak, and then we'll have a discussion in the latter half of this webinar. So I believe that Ms. Jaee Nikam has joined us, and you're with the Stockholm Environment Institute in Bangkok. I love this global feel of what we're doing here. Jaee, do you want to introduce yourself very briefly to the audience? We did that with the others as well. You know yourself best and your relation to the topic we've got today, and then straight into your contribution if you have that ready, please.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. So my name is Jaee Nikam, and I'm a research associate with the Stockholm Environment Institute, the Asia office based in Bangkok. And I just had a key points in highlighting what I have done in the past with respect to the research in sustainable manufacturing and supply chains. SEI was a part of a project with UNCTAD for analyzing the key industries that produce a lot of pollution in the South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, and we did have a scoping study done for that. And the main highlight for that was to identify which are the main key industries, along with what are the key barriers and enablers that these industries face to transition to more sustainable manufacturing practices. So we identified that the key industries in South Asia, which I worked on, were textiles, leather, pharma, and clinical, with textiles and leather taking up most of the market. And the total greenhouse gas emissions from these industries included more energy consumption and less of industrial processes. And the key highlight that we saw that there was a lack of data on emissions and limited number of environmental pollutants that were covered in the data set. So that is something that you could possibly highlight in the future research as well. But another very interesting thing when it comes to working on industrial processes or supply chains in the global South is that there's a lot of informality included when it comes to manufacturing. The percentage of SMEs are really high. And when we try to address industries in general, there is a differentiated contribution because there are the bigger manufacturing industries have better sustainable manufacturing practices, whereas the majority of smaller SMEs do not either have the capacity or the knowledge for transitioning towards more sustainable manufacturing practices. We also carried out a brief research on identifying the barriers and enablers SMEs in Southeast Asia and South Asia face to transition towards circular economy, basically. And we identified that they were starkly different than what is identified in like when there is a global research done when it comes to sustainable practices. And most of these barriers and enablers, but barriers surrounded around government having lack of having more taxes and lack of subsidies, as well as like incentives were not provided towards more sustainable manufacturing processes. That was one, and the other was societal barriers, like there was not a lot of awareness and not a lot of infrastructure support for these SMEs. So it is really important to like highlight that the percentage of SMEs and these barriers that needed to be addressed along with these major industries that kind of feed into the international or global research studies. Also, I think I just covered all the points. Sorry, I just had like really quick points. Also, when we are trying to identify the solutions for this problem, I think it is worthwhile to look at the entire pollution, entire supply chain that includes the stresses by the buyers generally in the global north, as well as the requirements by the suppliers in the global south. So there is a lot of interaction and engagement and coordination when it comes to that. So instead of focusing only on global south, it would be worthwhile to look at like it from a global perspective and try to find out like the key interactions between the global north and global south and how they could improve to help global south move towards more sustainable manufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaee, for that input. Yeah, that prevalence of the SMEs definitely, and the informality, indeed, it's not formal SMEs often, but yeah, to various degrees informal, certainly a big topic in sub-Saharan Africa as well. I believe we also have our panelists, Mr. Arpit Bhutani, on the call. You come from the industry side, from India, I believe. I've seen something on your very short bio about co-founding a circular innovation lab. Do you want to introduce yourself to this group? We're a fairly intimate group from across the global south and north. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly and then make your inputs?
Thank you so much, Mr. Harro, and lovely to be here today. Sorry, my internet is a bit off, so I'll not be able to switch on the camera. But yes, so I'm wearing two hats. One being the third generation FMCG business in India, a small SME business, and second being a circular economy and trade professional, founding the Circular Innovation Lab, which is a think tank in circular economy. But then I'll be speaking on behalf of small business community, which is which now I see is very different on when we actually go on the ground and see the reality, which is very different from what even I used to propose in my studies and reports. And I'll give you some real practical examples. For instance, let's say in my factory there is a lot of electrical shortage because especially in summer the government is not able to provide electricity. So we had to buy electrical generators. Now electrical generators add pollution to it. So we took the approval from the government. But now New Delhi is facing such severe pollution problems. Suddenly the government said that you need to impose emission control device on the generator to use the generators. So we approached the government that please tell us which are the certified emission control device manufacturers so that we can install them. They said, we have not certified anyone. So while there are inspectors, while there is sanction, while everybody is coming to inspect whether we have installed or not, but there is no certified emission control device manufacturer. So that is why when I say this, there's the implementation is the key. Not making new policies is the key. Not following sudden drastic measures on businesses is the key. So this is a kind of an example where the top line of implementation just says that the business needs to do it, and that needs to be done. So I think again, we need to focus a lot on hand holding rather than again continuing this discussion for several years of businesses versus environment. And unless we do that and do trust building and hand holding to businesses, especially the SMEs, this problem will not go away, because either the businesses will try to evade implementation or they'll not be able to implement. A lot of my time goes in understanding how to implement and how to focus on. There's another issue. For instance, my business is focusing on dry spices or dry food, which does not emit any kind of water because water is not added to the food. Now I need to do a lot of surveys to prove that I do not use water, and a lot of and I'm still categorized to be a part of the emission treatment plant, which for smaller companies is not in the business, but it's in 100 industries share it as at one place. I still have to take the membership. I still have to pay for it, but I'm not using it. It's because it's not required. Now, the recent Indian Supreme Court judgment on this has taken a stand to help SMEs also on the ground, and has stated, and I'll quote, an establishment contributing to the economy of the country and providing livelihood ought not to be closed down only on the ground of technical irregularities. So I think, and this has happened recently, a lot of businesses in India were closed on technical irregularities and documentation. So again, my focus when I talk about here is that we need to talk about trust building. We need to sit down with SMEs, understand them. We need to again negate on that they lie on the other side of the spectrum and that they do not want to have a pollution-free world. Even I have problem, like I need to take oxygen, external oxygen, then during 3 to 4 months when Delhi is so polluted, and sometimes I have to come back to Europe and stay for a few weeks to go and then go back. So even businesses want that. It's just that the economic system is flawed. If anybody needs to get rich, they need to follow at the moment the take, make, dispose model, especially in the FMCG business. FMCG business is about the most you can manufacture, the most you can sell, the most money you'll make. I'm sure, whenever we talk, and when I talk about circular economy, new jobs will be created, but then we need to first look at the present. The present requires food on the plate, not just for the business owners, but for the 70 laborers that work in my family, in my family business. So at the moment, the economic system talks only about taking the resources from the planet, making it into products, and then disposing them off. Now, we need to ensure that this transition is as smooth as possible and not have major shifts and major drastic impacts, and not follow the path of what China has done and the West has done. So it's really a critical balance we need to maintain while we move forward. So again, on one more point on volunteers, and I love this study. I love this practical approach to in this study, but I love the point on this point on voluntary sustainability standards and private standards on their transformational difference in reducing pollution. I do not see any, to be very honest. I'll be very frank. These are just external pressures for businesses to do. Sometimes the registration fees and certification fees is much more than the benefit they can, and unless it makes economic sense, it does not help at all. Even I have just co-authored a book on voluntary sustainability standards, and I have really taken practical examples also on that. It really does not take much impact on reducing pollution. So these are just my practical inputs to the very, very great, very interesting study. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And wow, what a powerful input. And on the one hand, I'm so sorry to hear just what it means to have to breathe that air. And then I think for the authors here and the participants, just a reminder that there are business realities for these small businesses. And as much as you want to change, the system forces you to operate in a certain way. So yeah, that's I guess why it's so important that those who can do systems analysis and shape policy decisions must do that in a way that people on the ground get rewarded for doing the right thing. So let's move through to Desda, because I think Desda, these kinds of thoughts are things that have driven you all your life. And let's hear what you've prepared, but also on the benefit of maybe also picking up on some of the threads from the previous panelists.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harro, and I would like to thank the other panelists for their contribution. I don't have any slides prepared. As a panelist, I will contribute orally and engage with the participants during the discussion. Just to give a bit of a background on our part of work, which was covering, as I indicated earlier, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. It was undertaken as a process preparing the foundation for the more focused and detailed intervention that is planned to be supported during the second phase of SMEP project, as indicated by Henrique. So it has, in each country, it has two components. The first component is to undertake detailed scoping of the manufacturing sector in each of the countries, including their looking at the institutional policy context, operational context, and the manufacturing sectors, their contribution to the economy, and contribution to the pollution problem that they have within each country. So during this detailed scoping, each of the countries analyzed the existing situation within the countries and identified about 8 sectors that need to be of primary focus, and shortlisted them to 3 priority sectors based on their contribution to the economy and the pollution impact they have and the potential for improvement also. And in more or less all of the 3 countries came with similar kind of sectors, the 3 sectors which we were talking: textile, tanneries, and food and beverage. Of course, the order of priority differs from one country to another country, but these were the 3 sectors that came on top in almost all of the 3 countries by way of their importance to the national economy, both in terms of job creation, contribution to GDP, export earning, and so on, and also in terms of their pollution impact. And this was the outcome from the detailed scoping. And then, based on that, each of the countries focused on one priority sector, which they went into detailed mapping of the pollution paths. What are earlier Ying talked in terms of hotspots over the production process chain? Where are the significant pollution points? And what are the source of the pollutions? What are the contributing factors, and so on? So for Kenya, they focused on distillery, which is part of one of the major contributor of the food and beverage industry. For Ethiopia, they focused on tanneries, and for Tanzania, they focused on textiles. And they looked at the production process as a whole, from raw material acquisition to the final product, and where are the pollution points, where are the significant pollution generated over the whole production chain. And they identified the specific possible intervention options in relation to each of the pollution points. What are the possible measures that could be considered? And these were done systematically by looking at the whole production chain for each of the sector. And then they singled out specific hotspots within the production chain as to where the significant result could be obtained in terms of reduction of pollution. So, for example, for Kenya distillery, the focus was more on how to manage the industrial effluent that is coming out from the distillery system, which is the vinasse, high organic load and various pollutants within it, and causing significant damage already within the surrounding water systems in Kenya. So what are the options to manage the pollution or to reduce the pollution impact of the effluent that is coming out from distilleries? That is for Kenya. For tannery, they were focusing on the tanning process, where you have a significant chemical input, as you know, highly toxic chemical, such as chromium, and how can you deal with that, both in terms of how you can reduce the chromium that comes out with the effluent in the first place by improving the chrome uptake in the tanning process, and then how can you recapture the chrome that is coming out with the effluent before discharging it into the system. These are the main focus areas. For textile, the focus was on wet processing, where you have a lot of dye stuff application and chemicals application, which comes out with the effluent as a major pollutant into the surrounding environment. So the progression of analysis was done starting from the broader national manufacturing sector, sector-wise, specific production process, and specific pollution point. And it does not prescribe any specific solution. It just lays out the basis for the subsequent intervention that could be supported through SMEP where they could focus on, so that we could get the maximum output from this project support. And essentially, the reason why each sector was, as I have indicated earlier, food and beverage, tanneries and textiles were picked as 3 priorities by almost all of the countries. So by assigning each country to focus on one sector, we're aiming at generating sufficient knowledge and lessons from the ground in terms of how each sector could be it could improve its manufacturing efficiency and thereby reduce the pollution load it discharges to the environment. So the most important approach, I think, what we have tried to promote through this work is that it has to be contextualized within the local reality. We should not go into this process with preconceived solutions that could be taken by the countries. It should be generated from the ground level. And the detailed scoping and the detailed mapping were able to identify these points, including the issue of informal sector, by the way. When you talk about distilleries, for example, in the Kenyan context, it's not only the formal sort of medium scale industries or distilleries, it's also the informal sector, where you have a large group of informal distilling units that are spread out across the country. How do you deal with that? How do you bring them into this process? So the issue of addressing pollution, not only as an environmental issue, but it has also a social dimension, because to a large extent, these manufacturing sectors are polluting water bodies that are the basis for survival for many of communities around these industries. So essentially, we need to bring both the environmental, economic, perhaps I will provide more specific comments, feedback on the report that was circulated, which covered basically the background on circular economy and moved into the sustainable manufacturing and environmental pollution side. One important point we have to recognize is that this process, when it comes to cleaner production, promotion of resource efficiency, and so on, has been promoted for decades in these countries. I mean, the countries Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Ghana, and so on, they have years of experience on promoting cleaner production. And there is local capacity existing within the countries in terms of how to deal with these environmental pollution problems. So what SMEP need to focus on is on enhancing and building upon those local capacity and taking them to the next level of detailed intervention, focused intervention that have both technological, organizational, operational, institutional dimension in order to be successful in the final outcome. So I would like to stop here, and then we can go into the discussion based on the question to be raised. Over to you, Harro. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Desda. Yeah, again, I think very valuable inputs here. Just you know, it's got to be locally contextual and understood. And I think thanks for sharing the approach that SMEP had taken in those 3 countries. And then, yeah, a lot of what we're talking about here is not new, and there have been many attempts and approaches and infrastructure built and people trained and so on. So how do we relate to what's been before us, but also what is new? You know, there are now very serious commitments to getting the climate crisis under control. Circularity has popped up as maybe a new discourse, but also introducing, I think, new ways of thinking here. There's been quite a couple of comments in the chat, and then I'm also seeing one question in the Q&A at this stage. And we've got just about half an hour now, I think, to get into a discussion. So I'm going to invite the audience, if you have a question that sort of can go to the panel, put it in the Q&A if you have access to that, please. I'm going to invite the panelists, if you've already picked up something in the chat as we went along, to deal with that now in a response. So let's do that first. And panelists, just raise your hand if you've picked up something in the chat that you want to speak to. Keru, was there something that you've seen in the chat that you want to respond to?
Yes, so there is a question about from Henrik in terms of having a case of companies that work with towards pollution control, and what are the drivers. And so, yes, there are a number of reasons why there has been a shift by various companies, what we have seen in Kenya and in Uganda. So one has been like the move towards reducing energy cost. So as you know, like from our country, electricity cost has been rising, but also in instances, electricity is also intermittent. And so we have seen companies think through about alternative ways, when it comes to energy, but also ensuring that they're keeping in mind in terms of reducing the environmental impact. So companies, for instance, Bamburi Cement, one of the largest cement producers in Kenya, they have more or less worked on converting waste, especially like from tires, and converting that into energy. And it's more replacing even the coal production, relying on coal. There's also like one of the biggest steel manufacturing companies in Kenya, so the Blue Nile Group, has more invested, shifted towards the solar. And that was last year. And it's because of the increasing electricity cost. The other move is also makeup when it comes to the leadership. When we see more women as part of the boards, we have seen more apathy towards addressing, towards conserving even the environment. So there has been, if there's increase in, and this brings about the gender component as well, when it comes to driving implementation of this pollution control technology. So that's something we have seen as very important. And then the third aspect, which I mentioned even via the chat, here is looking at those companies that either have some scrutiny locally and also internationally. So either they have been listed in the stock exchange market, or they are exporting goods to other countries, especially that they have more stricter environmental regulation, that companies have been forced to change the way they are thinking around, in terms of mitigating pollution. So those are some of the reasons why there's that shift. So like company like Bamburi Cement being listed in the stock market, but also have some exposure, like they have leaders, more or less the experts. So they have that foreign exposure. There has been more move towards sustainability, more or less adopting those sustainability practices. So those are a few reasons from my interaction with various organizations in Kenya and Uganda.
Thank you very much. Let's, Enrique, are you good with that response?
Yes, Professor. I see that there's some hands raised. I also saw a question here that is somehow related, since Keru mentioned the exposure to external buyers. The question from Natasha: what are your thoughts about looking at the comprehensive environmental impact, including that of trade procedural sides of export, import, in addition to the production process? So I imagine, Natasha, that your question is about foreign trade pressures on pollution control. Perhaps Arpit could develop a bit on that, or our colleague from UNEP. I will leave the floor open. Thank you.
All right, Ying or Arpit, do you want to pick up this ball, or do you want to pass it for now because there's this hand is up?
I had an internet connection, so I did not understand the question. I have seen the question Glenn has raised for me, so I can take that, but I didn't hear a bit what was said before.
Yeah, Enrique, if you want to repeat that as you read it, and
absolutely. The question is focused on the trade side of the equation, so the export and import process. What's the weight of that at pollution control in addition to the production process itself?
Right. In my experience, so my for big countries like India, I still sell 95% of the products in India. My sale is in India, so it does not matter, to be very honest, because it really matters for products which are more in commodity business, bulk manufacturing of spices, bulk manufacturing of textiles. But for brand owners, it does not make much, because big countries like India and China, they have such huge populations. It sometimes is difficult to even sell to the local population, because demand is always higher than the supply. There is a saying in Hindi, everything sells in India if you can manufacture it. So I don't think there is a huge difference trade can impact, but it really depends on the sector. For instance, in textile, it has done it, because manufacturing for big European and American manufacturers, it really makes a difference. But that alone cannot do it. There needs to be, again, on the ground systemic shift. Sometimes I've also seen one manufacturer, for instance, in textiles in our industrial area, having two factories, one which meets the European standards and the other does not. And major production happens on the one that does not meet the European standard to manufacture textiles and export it to them. So there is always a way out of these things. I think trade is a very important factor. Trade is a very important boost, but then it has to go in tandem with the local government regulations that really take the right enforcement of the local environment regulations. I'll also talk a bit about the question that Glenn asked on how how can we enable SMEs and empower them to address pollution from their activities. There is no such magic wand that does it. I mean, it really depends from one to another. I definitely feel that there is no transformational technology that can change everything, and that will never. I think innovation is very important, but then innovation will never outweigh the growth at which we are creating this whole mess. Innovation can never be that fast. So the key again is on getting back on the ground and understanding. First of all, there needs to be more clarity on the rules. I see that the rules are being set for bigger organizations and then are implemented to the SMEs. Sometimes it's very difficult to understand the rules. So obviously it's very difficult to implement them. The other being we need to move away from, like what Professor also had said, that move away from a sanction-based system to an incentivized-based system. We must reward the businesses that do this, rather than just focusing on sanctions and fines on businesses who are not able to do it because of some technical or some other capacities. But that is definitely for sure that that SMEs also want to reduce their negative impacts, not just for the pollution, which is very important, but it also makes economic sense to do it. It also it's a big material cost saving. Is not just not just good for the environment, but it also makes sense for them to reloop that material back into the system again and make money out of it again. Let's talk about economics. It really makes economic sense. So that's for sure that they want to do it. We just need more hand holding. I'm repeating it. It's not very academic to say it, but trust building is something that is at the core of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Arpit. You're certainly going down a track that I want to pick up as we get to the end of this discussion, and it's the second question in the Q&A from Anonymous. But Desda's hand's been up for a while, and then Ying, also you raised your hand, but you've taken down. So did you want to come in on the question that Enrique was asking, Ying? Before, because I think Desda is going to something else quickly. You good? All right, then let's go over to Desda.
All right, thank you very much, Harro. I just want to comment or clarify 2 points raised by some of the participants also. The first point on the importance of hand-holding and more proactive engagement with regards to regulation. I think which Arpit has talked very well. The reality in most developing countries, including African countries, is that coercive regulation does not work. All of the African countries or all of the developing countries have got very good pollution regulations, standards, and so on. But policing those regulations and coming up with effective outcome is not a reality we have in almost all countries. So we need to move from this coercive regulation to more proactive regulation, more engaging with the manufacturers, the SMEs, and the small producers, and so on. And in that regard, I just want to highlight one example which happened in Ghana. The Ghana Environmental Protection Agency, after decades of coercive policing of environmental pollution, with the establishment of the Ghana National Cleaner Production Center, it moved to more proactive regulation. And what it insisted was for any manufacturing industry at whatever scale to renew their license, they need to go through a cleaner production auditing. So the cleaner production auditing will show them where are the pollution points, what they could do, how could they improve, and so on. So it sets a benchmark for each of the industries. You have this problem, you can improve it by doing this and this and this. And the subsequent year, they do another auditing and they categorize them in 5 categories with different colors. Those who have improved significantly, average improvement, low improvement, no improvement, even deterioration. So the regulation, the policing regulation works more on those who did not make any effort to improve on their pollution reduction, while encouraging those who have improved, recognizing them, incentivizing them, and so on. So this has worked very well for Ghana to address some of its critical pollution problems. And I think these are the kind of things that developing countries, including African countries, should follow. The other point is the impact of trade influence on pollution and how it can contribute. But just to give you one practical example, when the Ethiopian government decided to aggressively go into development of industry parks, they were focused on attracting global chains, market chains, wholesale retailing chains of textile and garment products. And one of the outcome from that engagement was to make sure that whatever effluent comes out of the industry parks, it will have zero pollution. So each of the industry parks have developed zero pollution, zero liquid discharge treatment plant within their park. So it has positively affected or reduced whatever. I mean, there is no water coming out of each of the park, So every water will be treated and recycled and so on. But the flip side of it was it led to significant volume of hazardous solid residual waste that comes off the treatment plant. So the planning, it focused on removing pollution from the water, but it didn't consider as to how to deal with the solid residue. So subsequently, the parks were faced with this huge problem, which they were not able to dispose anywhere because they are not allowed to do that. So they are accumulating it. And now they are trying to see how they can use this, because the residual solid waste has high volatile organic compounds content, and it can easily burn into in a kiln, for example, in a cement kiln, as far as you have the necessary pollution control mechanism, or you can encapsulate it in solid structures because it is largely a solid part of material that can go into any concrete materials. So they are looking at all these possibilities. So the trade has that positive influence of taking pollution out of the water, but they have to deal with the solid side of the problem. So there could be this kind of influence related to trade issues. Over to you, Harro.
Thank you very much. You raised two mechanisms of collaborative approaches to dealing with these difficult things, the cleaner production centers and the industrial parks. And this takes us to the question by anonymous attendee. You're interested to hear views from the panelists on the necessary level of collaboration between stakeholders that is required to address these complex sector challenges. So panelists, beyond the national cleaner production centers and beyond eco-industrial parks, which are in a way ways where these challenges can be tackled with the help of others and in a structured, collaborative way, can we think of other examples of collaboration between stakeholders to address these complex challenges? Does any of the panelists have something to say? From my region, the Facilitated Industrial Symbiosis Program, for example, here in the Western Cape, has made significant improvements, specifically also reaching out to dozens and dozens of SMEs. Because in a city of 4 million people, you don't know who else is in business and who may have a resource that you're looking for, or who could do something with the waste that you're struggling to deal with. But yeah, panelists, any answers to anonymous attendee there before we take the next question from Alexa thereafter? And then I think we're starting, then we'll have 15 minutes, or we've got 15 minutes now till the end of the session. There's that previous hand, you've just taken it down. Ying?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Just for this question, I want to bring in the points of collaboration among the players along the value chains. You know, the importers, the exporters, the standards and certification schemes, and also the data service providers. As I think a few of the previous speakers mentioned, that you have to ensure the standards or requirements set by the importers can incentivize the positive action. Otherwise, you can set standards as high as you like, but in the end, if the SMEs, the companies on the ground, small suppliers would not be able to meet them, it does not make much sense. That's why I think for the standards to be set, the small SMEs and the players on the ground in the country has to be actively involved, and their voices have to be heard in order to ensure the standards are credible environmentally, economically, and socially, and also there are certain kind of support mechanisms for the importers to help their suppliers to build their capacity and knowledge, and to monitor the kind of compliance process, so that the cost of compliance was kind of shared among the different players along the value chain. Thanks.
Thank you. That's an important example. Nobody wants to penalize suppliers in their value chain out of business, but you want to collaboratively build a value chain that you can all be proud of. And I see Anonymous is now identified. I've read the third comment in the Q&A. Thank you, Alexa. Deza, your hand's gone back up. So I'm going to hand it over to you. I've been asked that we can close by 10:40, and before I hand it back to you, Desda, I just want to ask Arpit whether you could come in after that to speak about your Circular Economy Innovation Lab, whether that's also maybe a sort of space of collaboration of the nature that we're talking about here. But back to you, Desda, for now.
Thank you very much. Yes, there are some collaborative initiatives that support this transition that we are talking about. Just to start from specific sectoral example, for example, when the flour industry was booming up here in Ethiopia, the flour importers from Netherlands were engaging with the Ethiopian Flour Producers Association and the Ethiopian government to set up a standard, a voluntarily agreed standard for the sector in terms of their chemical utilization, application, and so on. And they have carried out a number of training programs, capacity building programs, and so on, which I think has contributed for improving the performance of the flour industry in Ethiopia. Going to the regional level, I want to highlight that there has been a collaborative effort between different regional organizations and entities supported by the United Nations Environment Programme, which led to development of ECO, which is sort of the African eco-labeling program, which is now managed by the African Organization for Standardization. And this is a regional standardization body, and it is supporting countries and industries in different African countries to meet that requirement and get an eco label, which is basically structured based on the experience, the global experience, and is recognized by the German eco mark also as a recognizable trademark. So essentially, it is facilitating trade between Europe and Africa by enabling African producers to meet that requirement. One final point, coming back to Kenya, for example, the Kenyan Manufacturing Association, the Kenyan Association of Manufacturers, has been collaborating with the Kenyan government and other technical support institutions to recognize manufacturing industries that have performed very well in terms of their energy efficiency by providing energy efficiency award regularly audited and updated and so on. So these are some of the collaborative engagement that you see across government institutions, private sector, regional organizations, which can provide useful insights for our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deza, for those additional examples. Arpit, do you want to speak briefly to Circular Economy Innovation Lab as a way to collaborate? And then I do want to, before we close out, just throw the ball back to our other two panelists, Jaee and Keru, to have the last words.
Right. So at the Circular Innovation Lab, we work on two fronts. One is policy work, which we do for governments. We're working with the government of Philippines and the government of Angola to create national circular economy roadmaps. We also recently worked with UNDP Costa Rica on doing a benchmarking study to help the government of Costa Rica develop a circular economy legislation, in which we inherently focused on incentivizing SMEs and businesses to focus on circular economy principles, and we focused a lot on design and upstream application of systems rather than downstream measures. So I think again, upstream measures and upstream thinking on the lines of pollution is something that is very important. The other thing what we're looking at is, like you've suggested, that like even you suggested that there is always that somebody's waste is somebody else's resource. And at the Innovation Lab, we're creating a global database on certain sectors where and I'll give you an example of a diaper company. At the moment, Copenhagen Commune is facing a lot of problem with diaper waste, and they're not able to really do anything about it. It's something that is not solvable at all. So we had a consultation with them, and then in our database we have a company that has revolutionized treatment of data, it's known as Pika diapers in Israel, and they've revolutionized management of diaper waste. And we put in touch with them with the Copenhagen Commune, and they're now discussing on consultations on applying it on a citywide level and as a pilot test. So what we're doing a matchmaking process. Either it could be on innovation, or it could be on material, or on being like a material library of waste, which can be utilized with others. So I think a collaborative effort on finding the demand and supply of materials is something that can make a lot of, even in my business, I sometimes have to really go and find out because the secondhand market at the moment for things is very informal in developing countries. So there's a big need to formalize that, both for the perspectives of the business sense and also for the economic sense. Yeah. So.
Thank you very much. Fascinating stuff. Last 2 minutes, 1 minute each, Jaee and we got Work and Keru. Jaee, do you want to give your closing view on the session?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to say that it's conversations like these are really important, because this is indeed a really complicated and complex issue. And I really appreciate the organizers on organizing conversations like this. And I'm looking forward to being a part of many more, because it is really eye-opening to listen to stories from people who are based on ground, as well as people who are working within the international level of research. So thank you for having me, and this is really helpful.
Thank you very much. And I'm just looking whether Keru is still on the call.
Yes.
Yes, you're there. You've got the last word.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to add something on the collaboration side, one of the things that now we are seeing is more collaboration between like investors, advisors, and even the solution providers that are coming up with more innovative business models to address some of the issues. So like some of the accelerators, like in Kenya, we have one on funded by the Waste to Value challenge, more or less an accelerator in Kenya that brought together Bestseller Foundation and Intellecap, which is an investment advisory firm, but also other companies that are thinking about various solutions and providing that technical and finance support. So just something to add on that, on what are the things that are changing in this space. So for me, in terms of the final word, this is a very important discussion we are having. And I think we are, this is the way to go to continue having discussions. How do you bring together the various development partners, the various, in terms of the manufacturing companies, financiers as well, is very important, so that to continue thinking about reducing industrial pollution. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to close this session. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to the organizers. And I hope as a chair who's sort of parachuted into a crowd that I haven't really worked with much yet, that I've more or less done justice to your expectations for a fascinating discussion this morning. Enrique, if there are any other sort of logistics things that you need to say before we ask everybody to get up and do some exercise, get some liquid or whatever before the next session, then you must say that now. But otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Harro. Thank you for moderating this, and special thanks to all the participants, the panelists, who give so many good insights, and the audience as well. I think there's, as you said, there's an intimate group, but a lot of thoughts. And Arpita, I really like the idea of giving hands between the policy and the practitioners and the businesses, so that those various pollution mitigation agendas can move on the ground. I would ask everybody to have a quick break. We have all the panelists are ready for the next panel, panel 4 on tanneries pollution, already on standby. But in order for us to be able to have a quick break, have a glass of water, and we convene back in 4 minutes. Okay, thank you all. Hello, everybody. I think we can slowly start the last session of this seminar on manufacturing pollution in the South. All very trade exposed industries that we've been discussing over the last 2 days. This last session will focus on mitigation of pollution in tanneries. So the world is very hungry for leather. Most of us have some leather items in our homes, offices, or sporting it right now on ourselves. I'm not a leather expert at all, but I had a personal interest to visit and understand this incredible world of this product that is a natural product. It is as old as humankind, and it has also some very high sensitivities due to its scale of production, to the way trade is done, and also through the processes that are used nowadays to make it. I will try to share my screen very briefly, just to show a few photos I took once I visited a tannery in my home country, Brazil, which can exemplify a bit of the tone of the issues that the sector faces in terms of controlling pollution from wet processes, heavy metals, and other products that the byproducts that can be toxic for the environment and for human health. So in order to set the scene, more or less, the first thing that struck me once I went to a tannery was the blue leather, so the pre-processed leather that I saw. Okay, I could never imagine seeing a blue leather before, and of course there must be some heavy chemical interactions going on for this step to take place. And then the second thing that struck me was the high intensity of water used to really process this, and it's done with some heated water, and the high amount of effluents that come out of this process. And the factory I visited, the tannery I visited, was actually a good one that had a capturing system. All the floor there was leading this material to containment tanks, to special treatment zones. But still, it looked very intense. And again, we are all buying leather. The other aspect I saw was the mechanical, so the physical residues coming out of cutting and scrapping the material. And they actually collect a lot of this scrapping residues into large bales, which can be used for other purposes, hopefully, or they end up as being pollution in the process. I imagine that there are different stages of environmental compliance or practices in tanneries around the world. And finally, the wet processes and the water discharges that you can see it's a really heavy process where you have a lot of dyes and materials leaking into the environment. So that is to say, it's an important sector. We are all stakeholders. It's not to blame any producers, not to blame any countries. We are all part of this industry, because I am a leather buyer, most of us here are. And I'm happy to have today a panel made out of a number of experts who can guide us to the state of this industry and through solutions that are being proposed and new ideas that hopefully will help to improve the governance of global ladder. So in order to start, I'll just briefly introduce the panelists. The first panelist is Mr. Sohail Ali Naqvi from the WWF Pakistan. Sohail is an engineer by profession, having an experience of more than 14 years in the environment and water sector. He is leading the freshwater program in WWF Pakistan, has been working with various partners like the EU, the ILO, the Asian Development Bank, and private sector, both in the textile and leather sectors, as well as in the water stewardship and governance issues. Sohail, it's a pleasure to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be one of the presenters, and it's also an honor for me. So I think as the topic is today about the leather, this is one of the important product at the global level. And yeah, this is something which is also unfortunately one of the major contributor into the pollution level. So that's why, you know, this is something on which different agencies are working, and WWF being the international network working on the conservation and advocate on the conservation of the natural resources. So that's why we just jumped into that area to a kind of the preaching among the enterprises, the industrialists, as well as working with the government to build the capacity. Because this is, though it's a very interesting sector, but there's a lot of potential at that, and unfortunately, there's a need for the more resources as well as the capacity building. So that's why WWF is working in a close collaboration with the different organizations which Hendrik mentioned. And recently, I'm also the project manager on one of the European Union funded project in the textile and the leather sector, and taking care of the environmental component. The social component is taken care by the International Labour Organization, ILO, the UN agency, and the environmental component is taken care by WWF, and I'm leading on behalf of WWF Pakistan. Next slide, please. So, as the topic is there, like the mitigation in the leather sector. So just a brief on that. Leather is an important component, and as I mentioned, like if we talk about at the global level, in the global market, it's a business of the 270 billion, and it's increasing steadily. Because the livestock and others, and Asia and Africa has been quite famous for providing the raw material as well as the processed leather and the blue wheat, which Hendrik you mentioned earlier in your presentation. Can you please click on the slide a couple of times, because yeah, the text is there. Thanks. So if we talk about the Pakistan is one of the country which is also supplying into the international market the products, either it's from the garment side and the tan leather as well. And leather sector contributes more than 5% of in our GDP. It has engaged more than 500,000 employees. But if we see, this is one of the polluting sector, a country like Pakistan, which is discharging the effluents directly or indirectly into the water bodies, and most of the waste from leather is the organic one, like because fleshing is there and other, along with the chemicals. Chromium is another contaminant. So our today's actually the discussion and the presentation will be how to mitigate that environmental impacts. In the earlier session, there was very interesting discussion. The businesses are always looking towards the cost benefit analysis. So there is always a win-to-win situation. If we invest into the environmental governance and compliance, for sure, there is a clear business case. The only need is to understand those business cases and then implement on ground. Next slide, please. So Pakistan is a developing country, just like the other nations. We are having the problems on the environmental compliance, and Pakistan has also signed different multilateral environmental agreements or the treaties at the international level. EU, as I mentioned, is one of the major buyer from Pakistan. So Pakistan also has got the GSP plus quota. Under that quota, we have to abide by more than 28 conventions. 8 of those conventions are directly linked with the environmental compliance. So leather, if it's manufactured and then exported into international markets, so we have to comply, one, at the local level standards. At the other level, we have to comply at the international standards, which are Leather Working Group is an example, plus the other multilateral environmental agreements or the compliance. LWG is, I would say, this is another standard where the businesses are quite struggling in the developing countries. So that's why, because and the EU has warned before the COVID, like they have mentioned, they will be procuring the products from those countries which will be complying to the LWG and the other international standards. So the industries are having limited resources, and most of the industry in the Pakistan comes under the definition of the SME, particularly into the leather sector. Yes, there are the big groups, but majority of the industries are the smaller groups. So this is another area of the challenge, how they will be tackling with that pollution. The other important area is the competition into the international market, the price which fluctuates, inflation is there. So how to compete into the international market, and treatment cost is quite high. A country like Pakistan, because it requires state-of-the-art technologies, moving on and implementation, and then discharging into the water bodies after the compliance of the local standards. Next slide, please. Okay, then what is the solution of that? So WWF Pakistan actually conceived an idea and pitched, and we got the funding under a project named International Labour and Environmental Standards Application in Pakistan's SMEs. It is funded by the European Union in collaboration with the ILO. Under the umbrella of that project, we actually conducted different environmental assessments in the textile sector as well as in the leather sector, identified the areas where there is a room for the improvement in the leather sector. In the earlier presentation, it was quite well discussed on the cleaner production technology. So this is the advanced form, I would say, of the cleaner production, which we named it the sustainable practices or the smart environmental management practices, which if the industries adopt, what they can get benefit in terms of the energy saving, in terms of the water saving, in terms of the resource saving. And then we calculated that or converted that in terms of the money, because this is something, the dollar value, which the businessman is always looking like how much benefits they're getting, but in terms of the environmental side, what are the benefits we are counting or calculating, and on the parallel side, we are telling those businesses. And there is a big room for the smaller and medium enterprises, like they can replicate those interventions within their premises and can get benefits for them. Next slide, please. So a few areas which we identified, and there is a series of the recommendations. Either it's the water management. In the water management, the foremost important thing is the water calculation. Majority of the industries in the developing countries, they don't know how much per unit production they need to consume the water, because water is considered unfortunately a free commodity, just like the Pakistani areas like in the Punjab, where the riverine water is available. So that's why that was a major problem. The industries were abstracting water, they're using and discharging. So the pollution is increasing, the wastewater is increasing. So we need to measure that, and with the other recommendations, how they can reduce their footprint within their production. Because to handling the waste, there are two methods. One, at end of the pipeline treatment is there, but it is complicated, cost extensive, as well as the high tech. Excuse me. But on the other side, within the production process, how you can reduce your footprint by adopting different practices. So the sustainable environmental management practices jump in, energy management, chemical handling. So these SEMPs or the sustainable management practices, they provided the guideline to the enterprises, like if they adopt those practices, how they can get benefits. So in the next slide, I'll be showing you a case study which we did. Right now, the numbers increased. That was actually our last year. The sustainable practices which we identified, categorized into 3 main domains, and what the benefits the enterprises got in terms of their fuel conservation, CO2 emission reduction, chemical conservation, wastewater pollution reduction, as well as thermal energy conservation, because right now energy is a big issue or in the developing countries, particularly in the Asia. And all these best practices are also linked with the SDGs. Like SDG 12 is one of the area where sustainable practices, they are directly linked with them. And on the parallel side, we are working with the Ministry of Climate Change in Pakistan to develop a dashboard where those best practices will be reflecting at that level to what extent the CO2 emission has been reduced by adopting those practices. So it's in the pipeline as well. Next slide, please. So we got a business case where actually the 5 enterprises from the leather sector, their business case was there. We provided them a team of the experts on the technical, the guidance, and those enterprises actually reduced their footprint in terms of the energy, water, chemical consumption reduction, as well as the energy. So those enterprise, this is just a smaller case. Now the number in 2022 has been increased because this is the one-time investment on the capital side, and they got benefits on annual basis. You can see the figures, like those enterprises invested 30,000 euros on the smaller interventions, and they got benefits more than 45,000 euros on annual basis. And this number is, every year you can have an idea, like if the average life of an intervention is 7 to 10 years, how much benefits in 10 years time they can get benefits. Like they have reduced their water footprint by 54,000 cubic meter, reduce the the energy, the coal, as a raw material, the alternate. We provided them the things on the wood side, like the solar water heater and the other, which reduce their the cost of the energy, as well as the carbon emission reduction. So this is the case study for the 5 leather industries, and now we have taken more than 12 enterprises right now where we are replicating that model. So this is the idea, which actually, if the businesses are convinced, they can replicate within their premises, and then the training workshops could be organized for implementation of those practices. Next slide, please. So as a nutshell, just to moving towards the conclusion, the leather businesses could adopt those practices. And in Pakistan, there is an area where the green tannery, design, like we, on the basis of those recommendations, we devised one recommendation booklet, which we gave it to the industrial associations. And some of the enterprises, they have just started work on that from the day one when they were installing their machinery, because government has given a land to the industry people to shift their industries from the populated area to that industrial estates. So those enterprises have started work to get benefits from these guidelines from the day one. So there's a clear business case for the industries, along with the training module, and this is one of its own kind of the the benefits they are getting on the basis of the recommendations, and we are looking forward that could be replicated in the other regions and in the other industries as well. So I'll just stop here, and thank you very much again. I'll be happy to answer the questions right now or after the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sohail. Let me just see. No, we don't have questions yet. I'm sure we'll have very soon. We'll certainly have in the end. In order to keep the flow, and just a small remark, I really like that the WWF is working on measuring, on parameterizing the benefits for tanneries in terms of dollars or euros saved based on adopting the interventions. It sounds like the McKinsey carbon abatement curve a bit. So there are some low-hanging fruits that can be adopted. Linking to the previous session as well, having the business model and logic coherent and compelling, it's essential for any type of transformation. Next speaker, which is joining us today, is Professor Amir Rashid, who also comes from Pakistan, but he comes he works at the Royal Institute of Technology. He's a professor in production engineering at the Manufacturing and Metrology Systems Unit, Department of Production Engineering at KTH Sweden. He's also an advisor to the SMEP program and has been providing a lot of information and assistance in order to design research calls and evaluate the pollution problems from a more technical standpoint. Professor Amir, the word is yours. We're looking forward to see your reflections.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Henrik, and pleasure to be part of this discussion. Thanks for inviting. I think it has been very interesting session since this morning I joined, and I was listening to the earlier session as well. And I, of course, will focus more on what we are discussing in this session, very much the tanneries area. And just to give you a background a little bit more, that since my expertise is in manufacturing, particularly in the discrete manufacturing sector, starting from large scale manufacturing to high precision manufacturing. And then the second part that is relevant here is my engagement with the circular economy in the context of manufacturing. And I'm leading a circular economy initiative at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, where I'm working. And also I'm sitting as the ISO Standardization Committee member for standardization in circular economy for the Working Group 2, which is actually talking about implementation of circular economy standardization for that. So that actually brings me to the question, I think, or let's say the insight that I can come with is, we have listened to, since this morning, we have listened to the speakers, and I think there is a converging opinion, or at least a conclusion, that the challenges or the problems that we are seeing in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, regardless it's, for example, food or tanneries or textiles, a very, let's say, common and critical outcome is that we have a serious issue with the implementation of whatever, let's say, policies or regulatory measures with respect to environmental pollution are brought in. So we have serious issue with that. And I think there is a no-brainer, and I should not go further into that. And I would like to focus more on what, for example, are the different, let's say, ways to tackle that. And I think there was a very interesting point in the morning discussion as well, that we have a challenge with this cursive approach of, let's say, penalizing the businesses that are actually not performing well on the environmental pollution. And I think there we have a challenge that policy and regulatory bodies need to rethink. And of course, we want to do an implementation. And for implementation, we do want to monitor. But I think the idea behind policy and regulatory measures should be to monitor, to support, and then support to implement, right? So if we are not able to do that, I think all our policy and regulatory measures just stay on the paper or on the tables of discussion, but not going further. So I think that it is important that the policy and regulatory bodies should be engaged, in my opinion, even through this program as well. And they should be probably brought on the discussion table, and also maybe some part of the education, that how, for example, we can move more towards the support-oriented approach rather than control-oriented approach. So that's one point that I think makes things critical in terms of implementation. Now, when we go down a little bit and we talk about the businesses and, of course, interaction of the businesses with the communities. So we do need to, I think I have emphasized it in several discussions earlier as well, and in our interaction for this work that we are now discussing, that value stream analysis or value chain analysis with a systemic perspective is very, very important. And I think in earlier discussions, few of the speakers have highlighted that unless we know where, for example, this value chain, while creating the value in the end as a product, is actually creating several different types of waste streams and pollution streams, it will be very difficult to actually pinpoint where we really should focus the earliest and the most. And I think then coming from the let's say sustainability side and circular economy side, we should be able to see that whatever we are, let's say, calling a waste in this process, so is it really a waste? I mean, we know very well now with the emergence of this circular economy movement and circular economy paradigm that a very modest, let's say, estimate from the beginning was that circular economy offers a $1 trillion opportunity, which of course over the period of time has improved, and now the estimates are showing that it's anywhere between $3 to $4 trillion opportunity per annum, if we actually take the advanced scenarios of circular economy transformation. And I mean, connecting it with, for example, the production environment, waste from, I mean, it is basically very interestingly remarked as well, in often in discussions, that 1 ton of electronic waste, for example, contains more gold than the 1 ton ore that we extract the gold from. So we need to rethink that whatever, for example, in today's production system, with a linear mindset, whatever is called a waste, could it be a value, right? And that we can only understand if we do a systemic analysis of the, and that I think is very important, where our colleague from Pakistan, Sohail, was also highlighting that when you show the business in this pollution control, or let's say waste elimination or waste control, well, I mean, there is no other opinion for the businesses to, let's say, not join this kind of, let's say, programs. Now, then I think that the third thing, that coming down to maybe micro level, when we talk about the production system, we do have a sustainability framework specifically for the discrete, let's say, product manufacturing in the automotive sector, in the aerospace sector, where we call this 6R framework. Now, I think that we need to look into those approaches, how, for example, these kind of frameworks through the lens of circular economy could be helpful in actually doing the analysis of tannery production systems, and probably rethink and redesign. So I think most of us here would be familiar with this 6R framework, which actually is based on this reduce, recover, reuse, recycle, redesign, and remanufacture. And this is very much in line with, or let's say it comes under the umbrella of circular economy, and it's a circular economy lens that we can probably use and see where there is an opportunity, even if it is a waste stream. We should have, we should do a very careful analysis, just connecting it with the tanneries production. For example, I was looking at in the work that we are planning to publish now, and the paper that was the reference paper here. So, for example, we have the possibility to see the byproducts such as glue, collagen, inorganic salts, hair wool, for example. I mean, just the product or the byproduct collagen caught my eye. And it is an extremely valuable supplement that we usually now see everywhere being promoted as, you know, with the health benefits. And I think, I don't know, for example, if this particular aspect is even being considered in this whole value stream from the tanneries. And we know that, I mean, nowadays, I mean, at least with the current technological level and economies of scale, the animal-based collagen is the one that is more, let's say, available and also financially feasible to produce as well. And this could be a very interesting, you know, a byproduct to look into. I mean, and this is just one example. There could be several other ways to look at and analyze these value streams, or the waste streams, which we call them today. But could they be converted into value streams? Now, then I think that going further down, another important aspect, which I think is probably missing to my understanding in our discussion, is how do we educate people? I think that a larger part of implementation challenge could be addressed if we are educating the whole chain of stakeholders, starting from the policymakers down to the workforce. And there is no systematic way of, let's say, educating this whole chain of stakeholders or whole network of stakeholders. So I would strongly emphasize on this part. While we are actually looking at, you know, policy and regulatory innovations, probably business model innovations, technical innovations, we absolutely need to look at how to educate not just the workforce part. I'm talking about the whole network of stakeholders, and keep that that education more as a lifelong learning with the lifelong learning approach. And the education can be about everything in terms of, let's say, for example, how these businesses can benefit from becoming environmentally more sustainable, how the health and safety of the workers can be improved, and how, for example, the new technical solutions could be helpful in tackling these challenges. So I think that probably one of the engagement could be the education and knowledge dissemination, which I would say that, of course, has been mentioned earlier, but I would like to put much more emphasis. And in doing so, we need to actually have a very close collaboration with the local environment when we want to set up these kind of education and knowledge dissemination, and even the new knowledge development. I think the local environment must be engaged. For example, vocational institutes and the universities, who could actually then sustain these kind of education programs on, for example, long-term basis, so that the businesses can go back to them. These kind of programs should be very much from the support point of view, rather than from the business point of view, that they should not be used as, let's say, a leverage to make a business out of educating these people. These should be more. So that's where I would like to stop, I think, and I will be happy to take questions if there are some specific ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Amir. We are getting questions in the chat box, but I would rather keep them later because they have a general panorama, which I think could be applied to both of you and the other specialist speakers. In order to collect some practitioners' views, we have our next speaker coming from another region of the world, Richard Oruko, who is a leather development officer in Kenya. So he works at also works at the Ministry of Livestock and of the government of Kenya. And Richard has published extensively on the subject, including a recent article on environmental science and pollution research entitled Investigation of the Chromium Status, Heavy Metal Contamination and Ecological Risk Assessment via Tannery Waste Disposal in Sub-Saharan Africa, Cases for Kenya and South Africa. Richard, the word is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you are getting me clear. As
Yes, we hear very well.
been explained, I'm from Kenya. I'm trained in leather technology, and I'm also extensively trained in environmental science. I've done a lot of work in environmental science, and I've done a lot of publication. Some of my recent publications, apart from the one mentioned by Enrique, is the integration of sustainable development goals into leather tanning industry in sub-Saharan Africa. Another work which I've done recently is a contemporary and future direction of chromium tanning and management in sub-Saharan Africa, among other work which you can access online. I'm grateful to have been invited to this conference or seminar on tanneries because this is my pet area of interest. I would like to begin by saying that despite the fact that the tanning industry is having economic benefits, the nature and the magnitude of waste generated from this industry during tanning process or manufacturing of leather is becoming an issue in terms of public health and environmental effects. Thus, it has been found that there is a need to review the evolution and transformation of tanning or tanneries waste management in sub-Saharan Africa, and that is the area I've really tried to look at in those two publications. When you go through that, you will find that the conventional or traditional method which has been used are the physical, chemical, and biological treatment. That is what the African tanneries have been doing for quite a long period of time. But the impact from this waste, once they reach the environment, is becoming a real concern. Going by what is there globally, you find that tanneries have been trying to introduce cleaner technology. And in that line, Africans have not been left behind, but what they have contributed in that line is too small. If I can go back a bit to the waste management, traditional waste management, in Africa, you will find that the management techniques which are available currently are the use of anaerobic treatment, using either lagoon system, contact filter, or upflow anaerobic sludge blankets or reactors. This is very common in the region, but most of them are not efficient. Therefore, most of the waste still get out of the tanneries into the ecosystems like water bodies and the soil. In that line, they also use the chemical precipitation and sedimentation, where they produce a lot of sludge, and the disposal of this sludge is now a real problem in these industries. The solid waste from these industries, in a number of cases, are normally disposed using either crude combustion or crude dumping in landfills, which are not properly controlled. And this is one way of polluting the environment and causing a lot of pollutants into the ecosystem, which in the end will affect human health. Salt recovered from the leather industries is also a very big problem in the region because they is causing a lot of corrosion in the buildings and even the equipments which are used in these industries. There is an element which is taking place when it comes to low quality hygiene skin. In Africa, we find that in the West African region, people are consuming this as protein. But what if it could be used to make gelatin in the value addition chain? I think that will make the quality, the protein to fetch more money than what it is fetching now when it is sold as the raw material to those countries which consume it. The conversion of the collagen-based material into medical and other applications have been reported in the region, especially in South Africa. But the other region countries in the sub-Saharan region seem not to be having the technology, which means there is a need to transfer the technology from those areas which have this technology to other regions where we have a lot of production taking place and the material, some of these materials are going to waste. We have the gaseous waste management, whereby hydrogen sulfide and ammonium gas from the tanning industry is making the industries to be shunned by many people because of the poor smell. Thus, the need for adoption of cleaner technology, which if they are adopted, for example, we can look at the pre-tanning stage. There is a need to reduce the salt used in curing. There is a need to segregate the waste in the tanning industries. Deherring, air recovery, replacement of sulfite, non-enzymatic painting techniques. All these techniques, if they were introduced, they will help us reduce the amount of chrome of waste generated from the tanning industry. But the unfortunate bit of it is that the cost of some of these technologies is very high. We also have regulations, but the implementers are laxity are there, and even technical skills are still missing in the region. So some of this technology could be there, but the region does not have the capacity to adapt them at the appropriate time. We can also talk about the minimization of waste in the tanning stage, whereby we could prefer the recycling of spent chromium lacquer. But in some cases, some of these techniques requires people to have better understanding of the technology. So you might find that recycling of this waste might not be appropriately applied in the region because of probably the technicians or the workers don't have that knowledge, or if they have the knowledge, what the market demand is sometimes requires more. That if they use these techniques, they might not meet their market demand or their market obligation. So a number of suggestions have also been put across in terms of the use of alternative to chromium, like using aluminum or using silicates, sodium, titanium, and others. But some of these chemicals are also expensive for our local industries to use. And the technology of using them are also expensive. How can we make this technology become more affordable for these industries to adopt? If you go to the post-tanning stage, where we use a lot of dyes, the application of high-performing dyes could also help us reduce some of this waste. Proper control of spraying machines can also help us in reducing the amount of dyes we use, or how we apply them. Use of proper rollers, coaters, or low pressure spray pistols, which are new applications, but their costs could be a hindrance in the region because most of our tanneries, some of them are not able or are not willing to put more resources in these new techniques for them to adopt technology which can make them get good quality material at the same time protect our environment. So in line of that, there is talk of zero waste concept. And in this line, here we could be talking about process modification, whereby if we go, for example, in the soaking, can we come up with a technique whereby we can exclude the soaking and go to the liming and reliming or the liming stages and use chemicals which are not toxic to the environment, chemicals which are biodegradable, or we can go to a stage whereby if, for example, we are in the pickling and gasification, we use them where we don't apply more chrome and use less, use different techniques to open the fibers, among other techniques. They could also help us reduce the effect of the waste that goes into the environment, because in most of my work, which I did when I looked at the chromium waste turning technology, I found that waste from chromium that goes into the environment transform due to other factors into chromium-6. And you know, chromium-6 is very toxic to our health. And this is a very serious concern that we need not to look at it by just discussing, but we need to come up with a solution. And this is where now there is the talk of adopting bioremediation technology, whereby we can use animals, we can use plants, we can use microbes to help us degrade the toxicity of some of these veterinary chemicals. Once we can achieve that, I think we can move forward. Unfortunately, in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, some of these technologies are not yet there. And if they are there, they are still in the lab. They have not been moved from the lab to the industry. And even the policymakers in the region, some of them are not even aware about this. And if they are aware, they are not in a position to help the industry to achieve them. So what can we do or propose so that the policymakers, the scientists, the veterinarians can come to a platform whereby they can share the technology and move forward, so that this industry, which is crucial in the mankind civilization, can move with the time. Lastly, I would like to talk about a concept which is also coming up in the leather industry, and that is the eco-industrial leather parks and cities concept. This concept is there. China has done it, or I think I've seen something in Bangladesh. India are also doing it, whereby now all tanneries are brought together to one central place so that they just do the tanning, but the waste they generate is taken care of by some central waste management. And if they can do this, we are likely to see a circular economy being developed, whereby the materials generated by the tannery can be used for as a resource by another tannery or another industry, or in another way can be converted into another form of material which is valuable to human use. There is also the water resource conservation. Water is soon going to become a very serious resource if we don't look into it. We need to do something about that. This also is attracting investment, it is generating employment, it is increasing foreign exchange earning. It is also enhancing technology transfer, among other things. So in my conclusion, I would better suggest that there is a need for scientists from sub-Saharan region to collaborate with their counterpart from advanced countries, so that we can see how we can bring what is lacking in sub-Saharan Africa to sub-Saharan Africa from those regions, and then scientists can share the way we have got this platform to share. Because sometimes we can have the idea, but where do we share it? That could be another way of seeing how to go forward in future. So in my conclusion, I prefer that let the bodies which are outside there with some fund help upcoming scientists in the region to at least do more research and give out their findings, which can be shared and can be transferred to the industry. With those few remarks, I wish to stop there, waiting for questions and comment on my presentation.
Thank you, Richard. It's very clear that you went very deep into the science of tanneries, and it's good that the world has people like you who all the points you touched on upscaling traditional processes to the disposal of solid waste, concentrating activities in eco-industrial parks, the byproducts being monetized like collagen, and finding alternative markets. This recycling of chemicals or processed chemicals, changing processed chemicals to less harmful ones. All those things remind me that the topics in the presentations are very related. We just saw WWF trying to work together with the EU and ILO on identifying some spots that are where the cost benefit of application is worth it. And I also made me think about the Keru's presentation on manufacturing pollution, where the business case is essential for that places where you have a very big need, you have a lot of material, but a lot of need for technological application are actually matched with areas of the world where you have those technologies being offered. So there's a lot of bridges to be built between tech suppliers and tech implementators. And I think a lot of opportunities, as you said, because water conservation is a business, and so is exchange of knowledge. As you said, invest in scientists and invest in knowledge exchange. All is much appreciated. I'll give the word now to another sectoral practitioner who I've witnessed organizing a very large event a few months ago in Bangladesh on the tannery sector, Mr. Mohammed Sadat Shibli, who is the current director of the Asian Foundation for the Bangladesh office, where he heads various projects there. Mohammed, it is a pleasure to give you the word.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, right, great. Thank you. I was really enjoying the discussions, and I'm really honored to be a part of this discussion today. So I have the Asia Foundation basically has been working in the tannery industries in Bangladesh for quite a while now. And I have been hearing from like Richard and other discussions. Basically, it seems like the problems and the pollution issues basically are almost similar in all other countries, in Bangladesh. So I will just start with a brief about the tanning industry in Bangladesh. Next slide, please, if you can. So the leather sector in Bangladesh is one of the oldest industries in Bangladesh, and almost 92% of the leather workers working in this industry comes from the tanning industry, basically. And it was supposed to be the highest in the export earning industry in Bangladesh, behind only the garments industry, but unfortunately for various reasons it couldn't be. So previously it was situated in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, and only with a land area of 50 acres. And in 2017, basically the tannery shifted to a tannery industrial estate with a land mass of now 200 acres. Like Richard was mentioning about the tanneries industrial parks. So Bangladesh basically tried to do that and shifted the whole industry to a tannery industrial estate, but with an aim to basically increase the production and reduce pollution. Unfortunately, both of that failed, basically. So I will be discussing about like why that failed. And so at the initial level, when the tanneries were in Hazaribagh, there were like 230 factories. But when they shifted to the newer location, it was only 123 factories. And because of COVID and other issues, now only 100 of them were really operational. Next slide, please. Okay. So basically, this is what happens in the tannery industry in Bangladesh right now. So the rawhide comes in. So there are like chemicals and water are used. Energy is also used, and then the produces like finished leather is produced. Then there is solid waste, liquid waste, and gaseous waste is produced in this industry. So this is how the tannery industry functions. And you can see that waste. I have like put some pictures. I have basically put more pictures than words there. I think pictures especially talks a lot more than words, I would say. So you can see like these are the waste those are produced. Next slide, please. So this is again the same thing that I said earlier. So this is I am not going to be discussing about this anymore. Next slide, please. So what sort of pollution is currently happening in Bangladesh, especially the tannery industry area? So Before the relocation, the tannery industry was located in the bank of the river Buriganga, and at that time there was no effluent plants, treatment plants there. So all the pollution, waters and everything that are pollutions were produced that were basically that went into the river Buriganga, making it really, the water were really polluted, and it was never, the water can never be used. So thinking of this issue, what they did is they thought of the government and environmental organizations, NGOs, and other think tanks basically thought of a new place where they thought that there will be a central effluent treatment plant, and they basically the government and the private sector, they work together and build this industrial estate in Savar with a central effluent treatment plant. But what basically happened is when they were building that CETP, they didn't thought of the peak seasons, peak hours, so the daily capacity of the CETP was 3,000 cubic liters per day. But what happens is during the peak season, I mean, during Eidul Adha, when the sacrificial animals were slaughtered. So at that time, for those 3 and 4 months, so they're like all raw hides were being collected, and the daily flow of water increases to 50,000 to, even at times 60,000 cubic liters at that time. So the CETP couldn't treat all this water, and all these, polluted water basically goes to the river. So while so this was not thought of when they were building the whole industrial park. Then what happens? What now is happening is this: the river Dholeshwari, that the estate is near, it is being now polluted, and we have been talking with the local community people and everyone around that. They were saying that, and we also saw that the currently river water is unusable, and it became toxic. Fishes and all other what all other animals basically died, and they couldn't basically now wash their cattle, can't use that water for their irrigation and the like. So that is also very harmful situation right there. So the tannery industry in Bangladesh currently uses 200 types of chemicals are being used there, and most of these chemicals are harmful. The chrome recovery unit, like everyone was talking about chromium 6, that is a hazardous material. And there is supposed to be a chrome recovery unit in the tannery industrial estate, but it's still not completed. There is no proper solid waste treatment facilities there, and the solid waste are dumped in an open yard. Next slide, please. So this is some pictures of the central effluent treatment plant. What is happening? You can see that these water, it is really, it is not usable anymore. These water is being dumped in the river Dholeshwari. Next slide. I'm just showing some pictures like what is happening. So this is again water. These are like all water filled with chemicals and other things, and those are directly dumped in the river. Next slide. And so you can see that people are using chemicals in washing the hides, and you can see that they are like most of the workers, they don't use any protective gloves or anything like that. Some of them use it, but many of them do not use this PPEs. So they use these chemicals without any PPE. So they get most of them we have found that many of them has skin diseases, rashes, and everything. So these are really hazardous, and the chemical use, you can see that they are like using it without any proper way of doing it. So it's really a hazardous situation right now. Next slide. And this is like chrome. So this is chrome powder, and this is in the right side. You can see that chrome tanned chromium 3 chrome tanned leather there. So chromium 3 is basically used for in these industries, but because we do not have quality and quality basically use of they do not basically, the workers and some of the workers who basically tan these leathers with chrome, they do not have like enough adequate knowledge. So at times this chrome 3 turned into chromium 6, and chromium 6, like Richard was saying, is very hazardous, and that also we have found traces that also in some areas where in the solid waste, when in open dump yard, those are dumped. So what happens is chrome filled solid waste and also non-chrome filled solid waste all mixed together, and we have previously seen that those solid waste are used as chicken feed and something like that. So chromium and other heavy metals basically got into people through these chickens and chicken feed. So the government basically later banned everything, the use of tannery waste as chicken food, and so yeah. So that basically stopped, but because of that, what happened is that solid waste is now being scattered everywhere, polluting the environment severely. Next slide. So this is, you see that I have shown some pictures like where the solid waste is produced. So you see that from everywhere the solid waste has been is producing a lot. There are like various types of solid waste. This is solid waste, then there are like far shaving waste, and there are like liquid waste as well when they were slaughtering animals and the hides were being taken into the tannery industry. You will see that those hides has meat in those, so they basically dump those meat out and store them in open places. So those becomes gets rotten and also severely pollutes the environment. Next slide. And this is the picture of the open dumping yard right now. You can see like how solid waste is being dumped in open areas. You can see like what is happening right now in that industrial areas. Like really very bad situation right now in terms of managing solid waste, and it is severely polluting the water, the air, and everything. Thank you. Next slide. So these are like dumping of shaving dust. So these are these basically also floats in the air. If there is air, the movement, these dust also gets in the air and gets into human body through inhalation. So this is also very dangerous for human health and everything. Next slide. These are also dumped in open areas. So if there is wind, it just, and you can see that they're burning some of these solid waste, and if these are like chromium 6 contaminated, then these air also gets chromium in them, and that's also very unhealthy for human body. Next slide. So there are like, what is the impact of the pollution? Like I have already told, there are because lack of proper transportation and storing of harmful chemicals, we have seen several accidents where people also died. Workers have also died in those accidents because we have heard one case where the storage facility where those are stored, I think there was some leakage of ammonia, something like that, and when some of the workers opened the door and got inside, they were killed of that poisonous gas and everything. So it's very important that the proper storaging and transportation of chemicals it should be basically implemented in the industry. And like I said earlier, chronic inhalation of chromium 6, there is a risk of lung cancer. We have seen like severe itching and skin disease among our workers in the Thai tannery industrial estate. We have seen that people couldn't use the water of Dholeshwari rivers, like I said earlier. The rotten wastewaters were drained and dumped in the river and other water sources. That is also basically, even underground water sources were being getting contaminated in those areas. And like I said, that the shaving dust is creating inhalation problems and lung disease and other people living around that area. Next slide. So what basically can we do? The Asia Foundation currently is doing advocacy initiatives with relevant government bodies to increase the capacity of the CETP. So right now, because the CETP has already been established, so it is very difficult to increase the capacity of the CETP. So what the government is now thinking of acquiring another 200 acres of land. So there will be the government is now planning to establish a finished leather industrial area or industrial park there, and there will be another CETP. They will be developing another CETP there, and I think those two CETPs will be connected so that the capacity increases. So that's right now in the talks within the government. So we are basically, the Asia Foundation is also having these advocacy dialogues with the government, regular dialogues with the government and other stakeholders to make this happen and to see that whether all these environmental issues are being addressed. And we are also talking with the Department of Environment to have more or stricter implementation and environmental laws, implementation of the environmental laws. I think so. We have quite a good and strict environmental laws, but those were not being implemented. So currently, the Environmental Department is basically trying to implement those laws so that the environmental pollutions have been reduced. And we are also working with, we have basically, like Sohail was saying, business cases. We have also selected 15 industries who basically wanted to have LWG certification, because without LWG certification, leather working group certification, the leather goods cannot be exported, to European and American markets. So we are right now working with 15 industries that basically wants to have that LWG certification. For that, we are trying to work with them to have all the compliances ensured, and other like occupation safety and health and other compliances. And we are also working with some of the informal, informal business associations or business groups or individuals who basically recycle, reduce, and reuse the solid waste management. So the Bangladesh government is also having a discussion with an Italian company who are also trying to get the solid waste to recycle and reuse. So that is also being under the radar of the government, and we are also working in that sector. Next slide, please. So there are like some other issues, like one of our discussions was panelists were saying that the reduction of salt in wastewater by that is also important. So a lot of salt is used to preserve the raw hide. So reusing those salts and removing them physically and dry salt, that is also very important. Otherwise, like Richard was saying, that salt also is creating a lot of problems in the area. And also reuse of used chrome liquor for low quality leather production can also be done or introduced in the industry. That we are like with the SNEP program, we have been talking about this. Thank you. Next slide, please. I will be brief. So you see, recycling is another area. I think recycling of the solid waste. Right now, we have very few informal people who are basically trying to do this, but it is not. When it was in Hazaribagh, there was quite a big number of informal groups. They basically collect the solid waste and produce gelatin, glue, and you can see leather boards from shaving this. But when the industry moved this informal groups, they couldn't move there because they were very small. And what happened is that this sector basically were non-existent now, but we have identified few of them, and we are trying to work with them to see that if this recycling of solid waste can be started again. Next slide. And also reducing solid waste by trimming. So if we before collecting or before slaughtering, if the trimming process is done before slaughtering, then I think a lot of shaving dust can be reduced. Also, raw trimming helps. If raw trimming is done, that helps recycling. So these are some of the areas that we can do to reduce the solid waste. Next slide. Oh, thank you. That's it. If there is any questions.
Thank you, Mohammed, for your presentation. Your presentation also connected very well with other issues that were raised, such as the importance of concentrating activities in a site for those treatment plants to have enough scale. And interestingly, even when those sites are concentrated and the treatment plants exist, sometimes you don't have the capacity to, or the flexible capacity to deal with peak demand periods. Your image field presentation was also very good to show us the level of informality in dealing with many of those byproducts. I'm going to ask questions now to the audience, from the audience to the participants. Allow me to pick the panelists. We have a question here from Robbie Reda from Ethiopia. I would ask perhaps Sohail Al-Nakvi from Pakistan to reply. What are the low-hanging fruit pollution mitigation opportunities in the leather sector? Also, are there examples where these actions have been implemented? And Sohail, I ask you because you're working with the EU and ILO on identifying good economic opportunities. Can you give us some examples and where those have been applied? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Very interesting question. Yes, when we work with the industrial sector, I can quote two examples. One is from the textile sector and the other is from the leather sector. After having a detailed environmental assessment, we enlist a series of the interventions or the recommendations for that specific industry. And then it depends upon the industry which they opt, because for sure it's a resource intensive where a couple of areas they need the financial investment. Coming back, and then we further categorized in our calculation, like this is less investment, high impact, or the payback period is lower. So on the basis of that, the first and the foremost thing is the measurement, because this is something where the water measurement flow meters, those are installed, those are less expensive as compared to the other intervention. If you measure, then you are in a better position to judge what are the resources. And in fact, the other presentations, those are very interesting, and I appreciate from the Bangladesh and from the African country as well by Richard. This is something, the discussion, like what are the interventions which the industry prefer. It varies from industry to industry, but if we just enlist the measurement tool, either it's the energy measurement, either it's the water measurement, either it's the solid waste measurement, this is something where we need to work on, and it's just only you can do on. The second thing is your material, which could be recycled or reused, which is again the wastewater. It will be a technical, like in the washes, because in the leather sector a lot of washes are used. So from the batch, the first batch, there's a series 2 or 3 batches where the leather skin is washed. So the last batch wash could be used in the first wash batch in a combination. This is easy, you can do, because you can calculate how much water it is used. It depends upon the dimension of that. But in that washes, because the first wash, the leather is having the salts and the contamination, so it doesn't require the clean water, because after second, third wash, it requires the more marginal water and the clean water when it's purified and then move to the next step. So the last wash water could be recycled in a combination of the fresh one or as a raw one to wash the first wash. This is the other area where you can get the successes. Plus, similarly, yes, then the other areas these are not the low-hanging fruit in a way, but then the chrome recycling or recovery is another important area. I have seen very good success stories where the chrome is and up to more than 99% chrome is recovered from the different processes. But there are the case studies, because they see this is having a value, economic value. They have to procure and buy for the processes. So they're trying to take that into the circle. So this is the other area. And recently we conducted another example of the solar water heater as well, because we need to heat the water at a certain temperature in different processes. So we need the external heater. Instead of that, Africa and Asia is full of the solar energy. So we need to utilize that, design that solar water heater, heat up that water, and could be used into cycles. The same case in the textile and in the leather sector in both areas.
Thank you, Sohail. I think if we plot the process flow of a tannery, we can see probably hundreds of different areas where interventions could take place, and fortunately, some of them are economical. I will follow the list of the speakers. I have a question here for Amir Rashid. So, Amir, you have a general manufacturing expertise. So, in many manufacturing sectors, not only leather, concentrating industries in a site and creating a cluster to mitigate pollution in wastewater treatment is efficient, but there are high investments to do that. So what is your take on this this duality between the advantages of concentrating activities in a site, so in an eco-industrial zone, and the cost that it has to be justified to make that happen?
It's a very interesting question, and also an aspect to discuss maybe in detail with reference to the tanneries, because this is something that we have been doing for long in the conventional manufacturing sectors, where we are talking about the discrete product manufacturing in automotive and other sectors. So I think that there is a huge potential, in my opinion, but it will only be feasible, in my opinion, when we keep in view that as somebody was talking about, that if we put them, together, so there can be, the principles of circular economy, or let's say the sustainability framework 6R can be applied. So my view is that when you put a lot of businesses together of the same type, for example, in this case, tanneries, so putting all, for example, 100 tanneries or 150 tanneries together at one place could actually create its own economies of scale, right? But then we have to make sure that we implement the 6R principle or 6R framework, so that, for example, in the end, all the inputs that are in there, particularly the material inputs, for example, and even, for example, the energy input and water and other, for example, chemicals and everything. So we do a very detailed analysis. And I think this is the key here, that we do need to look at the entire value chain and identify, for example, per ton of, let's say, ultimate product produced. So what are the different, let's say, inputs, and what are the waste streams generated from that? And how valuable those waste streams are in terms of recovery and reuse of those. So if we put them all together in one environment, and it creates its own, let's say, business case for, I understand that the cost of, let's say, putting all this stuff together, all these, industries together, will be high, and there, of course, we need intervention from the higher level. But I think we can create a business case by, let's say, a local, for example, creating a local economies of scale.
Thank you, Amir. And it's interesting your point on concentrating industries of the same type in a site, because I imagine that common industrial sites involve many different types of manufacturing, which complicated the treatment of process.
I mean, just to maybe elaborate a little bit, because when we are talking about the general manufacturing, then, for example, the waste streams are in fact, more generic, right? Here in this case, since this tannery is a very, very, let's say, niche area, so the recoveries from the tannery's waste could actually get back into the tannery's, processes. So I think that's why there is a bigger, let's say, I would say, opportunity here, in my opinion.
Perfect for recovery of process materials and chemicals. Thank you, Professor Amir. I will follow with the list a question to Richard Oruku in Kenya. We have a question from Glenn Wilson, thanking your presentation, Richard, and he asks a question on the transfer of technologies and the upskilling of people. Do you think there's a case for government or industry associations to facilitate access to technologies and trainings to upskill? And do you have examples of any African government and industry association which has successfully intervened to promote this type of upskilling and knowledge exchange, are there any facilitation methods to allow this soft tech transfer skills that you have witnessed that can be replicated?
Thank you, Wilson. I hope you are getting me.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Currently, I don't have an example, but I know many countries in the region are trying to adopt new technology, but there is a dislink. The link is not coming out clearly. And this is where I'm trying to put it as a suggestion or a recommendation that the government, the bodies, the scientists, whatever in the region, and the advanced technology need to come together and see how best we can transfer this technology. For example, if you go to China, they are regenerating leather from the savings and even from the waste, other waste. That is a very good technology. How can we get that technology to Africa where we generate a lot of this waste? We need to transfer that technology and make it readily available. Currently in my country, Kenya, people are being trained in leather technology, but you find that the area of recycling or reuse of waste generated from the leather industry has not got its right place. And this is where now we need to ask the other bodies, how best can we transfer that knowledge? People who have already got knowledge in leather technology, tanning technology, how can they get the latest technology in recycling, reuse, and whatever, so that they can make use of that knowledge and implement it at our local level, using our local resource the way we generate them. Because if you go to Italy, I think they are far ahead. If you go to China, they are ahead, Spain. But when you come to Africa, my brothers and sisters, like the way I've seen it in Bangladesh, things are horrible. And then you must ask, when all this waste goes into the environment, what happened to the people who are at the higher trophic level, who happens to be human beings? We are endangered if we don't take action right now. So transfer of technology, according to me, collaboration in terms of research will help developing countries to help developing countries come up with solutions to their waste problem.
Thank you, Richard. I'm totally with you in the sense that teaching how industries work and technical schools are geared towards the linear model of production, like how do you make leather, but not so much on how do you recover residues from leather. This type of knowledge needs to be cross-fertilized across countries and practitioners, because it's important to feed into the youth so that it becomes common practice everywhere. And I'm happy that Sohail and others are working with ILO as well, which is very close to those teams. I have a question here to Mohammed Sadat from the Asian Foundation, from Amanda Dinan in South Africa. Amanda asks about Chromium 6, Mohammed. She's interested to hear if you have any success stories to address this as part of process interventions. You mentioned Chromium in your presentation. So if you have any specific, very targeted success stories to bring to the audience on this point.
Sorry, is it directed to me?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. No, so unfortunately, no, we do not have any success stories till now, because we are working with BSIC, the government agency, to actually complete the chrome recovery unit that hasn't been yet successfully completed. So if we can do that, I think in that case we will have successful cases of chrome 6 recovery.
I imagine that this the stewardship of these chemicals and perhaps Richard, do you want to say something on this point? Please go ahead.
I want to say that when it comes to chromium 6 and chromium 3, like Ali say, it is a very difficult area to come up with a proper answer to it, in the sense that the chromium 6 and chromium 3 are the most stable chromium in the ecosystem. But they undergo transformation from chromium 3 to chromium 4, 4, 5, up to 6. In between, this is where we have the challenge. The factors which contribute to their transformation from chromium 6 to chromium 3 and from chromium 3 to chromium 6 is still giving us challenges in our research, because that is what one area I was working on. In the lab, it was giving me a lot of challenges because sometimes I couldn't really pinpoint whether the equipments I was using are the one which were causing it, the transformation, or the transformation came from the field or the environmental factors. So it is an area which still requires more research. And for us to get a proper answer to it, when I was trying to remediate the chromium solution, microbes were able to pick up the chromium 6, the total chromium. But at some stages, they were again releasing chromium 6 into the solution. So it is an area which I still want to do more work if I can get an opportunity, so that we can have a better information about the transformation from chromium 6 to chromium 3 or chromium 3 to chromium 6.
Thank you, Richard. And a good point. I mean, this whole seminar is also aimed to help us come up with very targeted research calls. We're coming in the second semester, and we have an expectation to have around 2.5 million USD call on tanneries to be spread on different projects. So please, ideas such as this, like going deeper into subject or implementation or creating platforms for collaboration, there are many ways of dealing with the tanneries problems. Please consortiate and bid to the program. That I have two general questions for the audience. Now we are heading to the closing. The first one is from Professor Amir, who is praising the experience of the panel. He wonders what are the views on the knowledge. The big question to the panel, and please go and answer like really to the point. What are your views on the knowledge level of stakeholders? So that in a broader sense, perhaps consumers, business that are buying the letters from those producers. So what are their knowledge levels, and how the lack of some practical knowledge may be a crucial barrier for implementation of pollution mitigation initiatives? So if you can have a quick view on this, the floor is open. Sohail.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, there was another question I also wanted to add, but first I'll be just answering Dr. Amar's point of view, because there was a question in the chat box about the financial institutions, like what's their role and how they could, provide some opportunity, because best practices are there. And if we talk about, because the SME sector, they lack on the finances. So parallel, we are working with the financial institutions to develop some of that mechanism, because initially, like 2 years back, we started work with the State Bank of Pakistan to convince them, and who made direct to the other financial institutions, private banks, to invest in those interventions, because State Bank of Pakistan in 2017 introduced the green banking guidelines for the financial institutions, but that was wholly solely on the renewable energy, on the solar system. Initially, those banks, and still they are struggling the business case. For example, the financial institutions, what they say, if something is the collateral, or it's at the they pledge something, that the financial existence is there. But if there is an improvement in the process or the wastewater treatment system, if that industry sometimes they back out, how they'll be recovering the amount. So this is something on which we are working, and we are going to introduce those green financing mechanism for the financial institutions and the stakeholders for the understanding. Just wanted to add that, because that was a question in the chat box. Coming back to Dr. Amir's question, very interesting and pertinent question. If, in my point of view, the stakeholders are also categorized into 2 or 3 groups. One tier is the upper one, who are the export oriented or the educated people. They know the the importance of the environment and the sustainability, and they want to do something. That's why they're looking towards the technologies. One group is who are the follower. If there is a new intervention someone has done, seeing is believing, so they wanted to replicate that in terms of the environmental interventions and initiatives. One group, which is the majority, they are actually they are having the survival war in a way. They damn care about the environment, but they say, okay, how our economy will be boosted and something like that. So for that group, exactly, we need to develop those kinds of the good success stories or the case studies. Like, if you do this, you will be getting benefits in that way, because they will be not taking care of the environment, but they are concerned with the the monetary value and about the money, like how the value will be boosted. So if we develop that kinds of the cases from our studies and interventions along with others, so they can be also taken on board. Just the rough thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohail. I have one final question here. We are coming to the closing time. A question that was inspired by a comment by Lyubov on the chat. The person asked that, well, the person made a point that leather is an animal product, and raising cattle, raising animals to take off their skins and produce a material that we use so much is still carbon intensive. It still has a long shadow on the environment, even though it's a traditional material that we've been using for thousands of years. My question goes, inspired by this question from the audience, would there be a moment where the leather industry can start to disrupt itself in a different way? For example, some petrochemical companies started to invest in solar power. Some meat producing companies started to invest in plant-based meat. Will we get to a day where leather producers, especially perhaps larger groups, will start investing in cork-based leather, waxed cotton, or different materials in order to slowly transition away from an industry that relies on animals? I know that this is a bit of a disruptive question, especially for the industry, but there's a very strong environmental reason behind this. It is an open question for the audience. If you can put your thoughts in a few words, in 20 seconds each. Thank you. Amir, you want to go first?
Well, let me just give my view on that. I'm not really too much detail into that, but I think that already disruption is on its way. More focus is to be given to the sort of development part of it. We already hear plant-based or vegan leather, for example. We have the challenges with, for example, they are not as long life as, for example, the leather coming from the animals. One of the challenges, but how, let's say, serious that challenge is, that we can discuss. But I think that sooner or later, it's a matter of mostly economies of scale. We are in a very initial phase of it. Disruption is happening. For example, several different types of mushroom-based leather, for example, cork-based, as you mentioned. So these are the directions, and I think that keeping in view that the sourcing of these, let's say, hides or skins is let's say happening through this animal agriculture, which is already under big question mark around this climate action initiative. So we do need to have let's say open eyes and open minds on that, and I think we should probably be one way or the other support that transformation and transition for sure, in my opinion.
Thank you, Amir. I will give the opportunity to the other panelists to react on this point as well. Please, Richard.
Yeah, I think the idea is good, but we need also to ask ourselves one simple question. Because as we talk right now, we know we have rubber, we have synthetic leather, which are already there in the market. but they have not replaced leather. Why? There is one unique characteristic of the skin which scientists need to look into. Any material they introduce, if that unique characteristic can be incorporated, then we will be out with the leather. And that is leather, all the skin can allow water to come out, but cannot allow water to go in. That is the unique characteristic of the skin, which has made us not to replace skin since time memorial. And that is where our focus should be. How can we replace that unique characteristic? You can read more in my work. I think I mentioned it.
Thank you, Richard. It's a very good point. Very good point. Mohammed, Sohail, any final remarks?
Yeah, I think like Dr. Amir was saying that you know, that the change will be there, disruption will be there, because in Bangladesh also the government is taking it very seriously, and even the committee in the parliament basically said to shut the whole industry off in Bangladesh. They recommended that. So I think the tannery industry, they are now they have to think of a better way, you know, to make it more environmentally friendly. Like shifting to other, like Dr. Amir was saying vegetable, you know, leather or mushroom-based leather. I think that is that will not be possible in the near future right now in Bangladesh, because we have so much raw hide. You know, we can't just shift from there at this moment. But I think making it more environment friendly will be the next step here. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Last speaker, Sohail, any final words?
Yeah, I think all the panelists have covered the much of the area, and this is something, you know, it's quite encouraging, I would say, to engage the stakeholders among these kinds of the seminars, and we can see the success story replicated, like in one region of the world, if there is some success story or the knowledge that could be replicated in the other region of the globe. So this is something which is needed to be, you know, having a frequent connection as well as a follow-ups, because innovation always comes with these great ideas, because it's not just only the one time, you know, because it has a history, but these kinds of the interventions, which are good practices in Africa, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and then it come up with that level that is for sure it hits then the policy level work, and then for sure it gives the benefits to the community.
Thank you, Sohail. Well, thank you all the participants, the attendees of this workshop for tuning in. A lot of practitioners, actually people engaged in the industry connected, and special thanks to the panelists who gave their time and knowledge to share with us this important theme of tanneries. We'd like also to thank the donor FCDO, the UK FCDO, for supporting this program. I would like to raise the importance of, there was a lot of knowledge here and a lot of knowledge providers. Keep an eye open for the calls for funding on the tannery section, which will be published in the second semester, early in the second semester. I've added the website to the chat here, smapprogram.org. You can register your interest there to receive notifications of when those call for fundings will be made available. That said, I would like to thank again everybody and declare the session, the research seminar finished. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you very much. Thank you.